Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Hiruzen makes Naruto Hokage Chunin exams. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Waves of Wind and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. A few things to note before we start. First, I am pushing the graduation age to 14. Why? Because throwing 12-year-olds into battle is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Sure, start training early to get the discipline down, but don't throw them out into the world at freaking 12. 14 isn't that much older, true, but it's 2 more years of physical and mental change, a fair bit in those years. Second, Naruto's timeline is vague and confusing at times, so forgive me if I screw it up later on. Third, if you're looking for character bashing, this is not the FIC for you. Fourth, English is not my native language. While I like to think I'm not too bad at it, I will make mistakes at some point, partially because I'm lazy and often don't pre-read well. If you spot one, point it out to me so I can learn from it, but try not to start raging at me, alright? Nobody's gonna get anything out of that. Fifth, it should be blindingly obvious that I do not own Naruto, as I am not swimming in a golden pool filled with money and more gold. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, looked out over his village through the massive window in his office. Someday I really need to figure out a way to arrange the office that doesn't place the sight at my back, he thought as he admired the view. From up here he could see all the way to the walls, looking down on all the houses, shops, and training fields. Even late in the afternoon the streets were still fairly crowded, people moving through the streets like leaves floating on a river. The setting sun dyed everything from the flat-roof buildings to Hokage monument depicting Hokage that came before and after, and the foliage of the massive trees. The village was known for a warm orange not unlike that of a fire's glow. It was almost as if it was a representation of the very will of fire itself. Yes, Konoha truly was beautiful. At least it was when one side of the Hokage monument wasn't coated in paint in all sorts of colors. Both the first and second Hokage had been drenched in an interesting mix of orange, purple, and green, with large orange swirls drawn on their foreheads. His own monument had barely escaped harm, and the fourth, being the furthest away, didn't even have a drop on him. If that wasn't enough of a clue as to who had vandalized the village's most valued monument, the fact that orange was the most prevalent color left little doubt. You certainly know how to keep busy, Naruto, Hiruzen muttered with a weary smile. As if in on cue, someone shined into the office in a swirl of leaves. Immediately the ANBU hidden in the shadows tensed, but they relaxed just as quickly when they felt the tattoo on their right shoulder pulse to announce the arrival of one of their own. Once the leaves settled, an ANBU with a hair mask appeared, carrying a squirming blonde boy. Thank you, Nasaji. Only 2 hours this time, HM? The Hokage asked, not turning away from the window. I'm getting better at catching him, M-Lord, the ANBU said, lowering Naruto to the floor. But he's still a pain to chase. Hiruzen nodded in understanding. Nasaji certainly still sounded a bit winded. You know, Naruto, if this wasn't so childish it would almost be impressive. Naruto chuckled sheepishly, scratching a fleck of dried orange paint on his cheek. The shirt he wore had once been black with a red flame symbol, but now it was splattered with dozens of little drops of paint, and one massive orange stain on his left side. Hey, come on, Hiruzen. That's a lot of paint to lug all the way up there. That's impressive right there. Hiruzen chuckled softly and finally turned from the window. That much is true, I suppose? He nodded to Nasaji, and the hair-masked ANBU bowed and vanished in another shunshin. Hiruzen sank down into the chair behind his desk and settled in comfortably before he turned his attention back to the 6-year-old standing in the middle of his office, trying his best to look innocent. In moments like this, it was all too easy to forget that the boy contained a creature that could easily destroy this village and everything around it in a 50 miles radius, and had in fact tried to do so. So, what is it this time, Naruto? He asked, resting his elbows on his desk and lacing his fingers together. As much as it seemed the boy acted out just for attention, there was a method and reason behind his pranks. He would go for weeks, sometimes months, at a time without doing anything at all, and then something happened to set him off, and Hiruzen had to send people to chase him down again. More often than not, his actions were some form of retribution. In fact, Naruto went out of his way not to involve innocent bystanders in his pranks, but that was hard to tell if you didn't pay close attention. The boy had a long memory, and most people had long since forgotten that they had treated him poorly when he finally struck. The worst part about the situation was that Hiruzen couldn't really blame him. He was all too aware how many of the villagers treated Naruto, but all he could do was prevent the worst. He could not always be there. His shinobi could not always be there, and, even if they could, he wasn't always certain he could just trust any shinobi around the boy. Besides, if yet another mob formed to hunt the boy, any decent shinobi would respond with force. That would no doubt result in quite the situation with the civilian council. This was different, though. A stunt on this scale without any immediately clear target meant that Naruto was certainly upset, but not with anyone in the village. It's nothing much, Hojizen, Naruto said, plastering on a fake smile. The Hokage didn't respond for a moment, aside from slowly raising an eyebrow and shifting his weight. Even at 6 years old, Naruto understood that this was the old man's own way of calling him on his bullshit. A shame, because he'd worked hard on that smile too. Clearly it wasn't happy enough yet. Said smile faltered for a moment, and the whisker-marked blonde shrugged. Got a test back today, and well, you know how I am with those. So I figured I'd get my mind off of it by redecorating the monument a bit. He scuffed his feet dejectedly and very pointedly turned his attention to the floor, as if he had found the meaning of life there. And there we have it, Hiruzen thought as he watched the blonde. He certainly was aware of how the boy was with tests. He'd only recently started at the Shinobi Academy, but it was quickly apparent that the boy was certainly no model student. He would have blamed it on genetics, as Naruto certainly shared his mother Kushina's boundless energy and subsequent lack of an attention span. However, while Kushina had not been easy to teach, she had admitted as much herself, she was still an intelligent woman. Plus, there was his father. Minato Namikaze was still arguably the greatest shinobi Konoha had ever seen, and, while his academy career had not been particularly noteworthy, his intelligence and skill were very clear even at a young age. Hell, the man had developed techniques and skills even his sensei Jiraiya couldn't begin to figure out. When Naruto started at the academy, Hiruzen had asked to be kept up to date on his progress, and while he had figured sitting in class for hours would be hard for the hyperactive blonde, he hadn't expected him to do quite so poorly. Copies of his tests were passed on to Hiruzen moments after they were graded, and it was clear that either Naruto just didn't read the questions closely enough, or some basic elements of shinobi life continued to elude him. The Hokage shuddered to think what his grades would be like when chakra exercises started. This seems like a lot of effort just for that, Naruto. You're still allowed to resit the test once, right? Perhaps you should have spent this time studying to do better instead. He chided, but Naruto just seemed confused. What are you talking about, Hojizen? The blonde asked. It's only certain tests that can be retaken, right? That's what the teachers tell me each time I ask. Hiruzen blinked in confusion, and slowly a deep frown appeared on his face. Do they now? I certainly haven't approved that change to the system. This was very strange, to put it mildly. It could just be a matter of a confused teacher or someone who had recently started and didn't know, but Naruto, did you ask multiple times? And multiple teachers? He asked, voice stern. Naruto thought for a moment, and then nodded slowly. Not each time and not all of them. I don't think I've ever asked Irika-sensei, since I pass his tests most of the time, but I've asked most of the other sensei at least twice. Why? Did I do something wrong? When he heard Naruto's hesitant tone, Hiruzen sighed and leaned back in his seat. He didn't want the boy to think he was mad. At least, not at him. No, Naruto, don't worry. You just reminded me that I need to check on something regarding the academy. Thankfully, the blonde seemed to buy the excuse and Hiruzen quickly searched for a different topic. Well, regardless, I hope you understand you will still be punished for this little stunt. The blonde pouted defiantly and crossed his arms, drawing a chuckle from the old man as he gestured for Naruto to take a seat. But first, how about you tell me how you did it? That seemed to lighten Naruto's spirits a little. For the next 15 minutes he went into great detail on his latest prank. There was almost always some form of construction going on in various places around Konoha, and Naruto had used it to his advantage, swiping cans of paint from the various sites and lugging them over to the monument. After that, I just needed to look like this was what I was supposed to be doing, though I still avoided the main streets. Pretty good, HM? The blonde student grinned at the aging Hokage. There was this really cool jumpsuit I wanted to buy, so people would think I was a painter anyway, but the man at the counter gave me a really high price and I couldn't afford it. That really sucked because it was cool and orange, and now I'm gonna have to save up for it. Anyway, come on, Hojizen. You know you're impressed. Hiruzen was, a little, but Naruto would never stop gloating if he admitted that. Still, to know the location of all the building sites in the village and plan an effective route to and from them to the monument, through the village's winding back alleys and lugging heavy buckets of paint, well, it was hardly envy-worthy. But for an academy student it was a lot of work. Sure, the boy had always been a little ball of energy, so the fact that he wasn't tired after carrying all that paint wasn't strange, but it certainly seemed like Naruto had done more planning than the Hokage had given him credit for. It's not the worst plan I've heard, considering you can't use jutsu or travel over the roofs to make things easier. He conceded after a few minutes. Naruto's grin was nearly blinding and Hiruzen quickly matched it with his own. You do, of course, realize that I should make you pay the construction workers for the paint you took. The boy's grin was replaced by a look of horror and the old man chuckled. Relax, Naruto. I imagine if I did that, you wouldn't eat for a week. No, we'll find some other way to punish you for that. The Hokage gave the young blonde a serious and appraising look. However, I will be lenient if you promise me that you will not let this side of yourself slip. Naruto's face twisted in confusion again, and he scratched the back of his head. Ojizen, are you alright? It sounds like you want me to keep pranking people. Hiruzen quickly held up a hand. No. Well, sort of. Naruto, the way you approach pranking is a good way to approach missions if you graduate. You thought about this. You planned this. Did you have an escape plan if you were stopped with the paint? Naruto nodded slowly. Throw paint in their face and run. He muttered, miming the motion of throwing paint from a bucket. Hiruzen gave him an encouraging smile and reached in his drawer for his pipe. See? Unrefined, but at least you had one. Planning and thinking about your actions are important. You don't need to be the strongest shinobi, Naruto. Sometimes it pays to be the smartest. The blonde Jinchuriki still seemed rather confused, but the old man could see the gears spinning in his mind as he turned his attention to the window and the monument behind it. But all the Hokage were really strong. Like you, Ojizen? If I want to be Hokage, I need to be even stronger than you. Hiruzen chuckled and nodded as he stuffed his pipe. Well, you're not wrong. A Kage has to protect everyone in the village, so they have to be strong. I like to think I'm a fairly dangerous opponent, but I've encountered people who hit harder or had more chakra than me. Yet I'm alive and they are not. Do you want to know the secret as to how I beat them? Naruto's attention snapped back to him, and he nodded eagerly. I had a plan, Hiruzen said simply. Naruto's reaction to that simple statement did not disappoint. For a few seconds his face remained frozen in barely restrained anticipation, clearly still awaiting some grand tale. Then a frown of confusion. Surely there was still another part of this answer. Finally he settled on an unimpressed glare, and crossed his arms over his chest. That's it. Hiruzen lit his pipe and nodded with a bright grin. That is it. He had to try his hardest to resist laughing as the young blonde kept glaring at him while he puffed on his pipe. Had I tried to match them in ninjutsu or taijutsu, I would not be here today, he said after a few minutes, figuring that he'd tortured Naruto for long enough. So I planned. I used my mind and found their weaknesses, lured them into traps, used strategies. In fact, with one of them it went so well I managed to bring down a rock slide on him, using the remains of a powerful earth jutsu he himself had used earlier. That put the exited smile back on the Jinchuruki's face, and it only grew wider when Hiruzen continued. And you know what? I think you have great potential for this as well. A shinobi's greatest weapon is often his mind, and, judging by the pranks, my boy, yours can be a really scary place sometimes. Naruto was all but bouncing in his seat now. Really, Ojizen? Can you teach me? You gotta teach me. Who better to learn from than the god of shinobi after all? Naruto just hoped it didn't involve lectures, like in the academy. The old man rolled his eyes and gently push-tapped Naruto on the forehead. I can't, Naruto. This is something you need to do yourself. Keep your mind sharp. Think. Maybe visit the library for a bit every day or so. Clearly the hyperactive blonde wasn't too thrilled about the idea of spending time in the library, but when Hiruzen assured him that he developed many of his own techniques by basing them on things he'd read about, he opened up to the idea. Alright then, but don't expect me to start liking reading. Books are boring. You want boring? Try paperwork. The Hokage grumbled, looking at the towering stack of forms on the corner of his desk. He'd gladly go back to the days of taking in squads of Iwagakure NBU so long as he didn't have to sign a form for it afterwards. With a sigh he looked from the papers to the clock above the door. Well, Naruto, I've still got a lot to do today, so I think it's time for you to run along. He pulled a paper off of the top of the stack and waved the blonde to the door. Don't think I won't find time to imagine a suitable punishment, though. Naruto sighed but obediently hopped off the chair and headed for the door. Yeah? I know. He paused just before the door, shifting hesitantly in place for a moment before he turned and looked at the Hokage over his shoulder. Hey, Ojizen? I'm sorry to give you more work. I know you're really busy and I don't mean to make it worse. Hiruzen looked up from the paper he was signing with a small smile. Naruto, even under these circumstances, meeting with you is something I enjoy. It is not work. Now when you graduate and report to me on your missions, then it will be work, but enjoyable work. Get home safe and send my secretary in, could you? The little blonde nodded happily and stepped out. Hiruzen waited for about half a minute, before he leaned back in his seat and sighed deeply. Hokage-sama? A young woman with long, brown hair that tumbled down her back in a thick wave of curls poked her head into the office. Naruto-kun said you needed me? I take it I should arrange for cleaners to visit the monument? Hiruzen nodded and took a deep puff on his pipe. Yes, Yumi, to both of those. As always, tell them to leave at least a bit for Naruto to clean up himself. However, first please send someone to the academy. Tell them to find Yumino Irika. Yumi nodded and pulled out a pen. Hokage-sama, if you intend to meet with Yumino-san, you should remember Mitarashi's team will be in sometime late this evening to debrief. Hiruzen nodded, glancing at much smaller pile next to the paperwork. Yes, I haven't forgotten, Yumi. Thank you. I should have their mission file here. He tapped the file in question and once more bent over his paperwork. At any rate, Irika is to report in and bring Naruto's official school records, without telling any of the other instructors. The brunette quickly scribbled a few things down on a notepad. The official ones? Are you sure? Official records included nearly everything a student had ever done in the academy. Every test, every assignment. In fact, the only way to get to the original test made by a student as opposed to a specially marked copy, you needed access to their records. To prevent tampering, they were rarely taken out of the records room even by the instructors. Any records that were taken out actually needed to be signed out to keep track of them. Quite certain. Hiruzen answered. And it is a matter of some urgency. Yumi nodded and stepped out again without another word, her sensible gray skirt fluttering behind her as she went. About an hour later, Irika arrived with the records. Another hour later he was still sat in front of the Hokage's desk, while the old man browsed throughout the tests, essays and assignments with extraordinary care. Hiruzen liked the dark-haired instructor. The man made a fair shinobi with a good grasp on the lifestyle and a caring personality, but he possessed enough self-awareness to realize he was not cut out for field work. The Hokage was growing less and less pleased, though, with what he had found so far in the records Irika had brought with him. "How is Naruto in class, Irika-kun?" he asked, pulling another test out of the file. The Chunin seemed almost surprised at finally being addressed again, but straightened in his seat and answered. "Well, Hokage-sama, Naruto is energetic, loud and kind of unruly. He does his homework as often as he doesn't, and every now and then he skips out with the other boys. He's a bit of a slacker and a loudmouth at times. At times I wonder if the academy is the best place for him." Hiruzen looked up at that, just in time to see the instructor hide a frown. "Irika," he sighed. "Are you certain it is the teacher in you saying that, or the part that knows of Naruto's burden?" Irika looked highly offended for a moment, but Hiruzen gave him a hard look and continued before he could speak. "He is just a boy, Irika. Despite what he holds, or rather because of it actually, Naruto is just a lonely boy. I would think you would sympathize with that feeling." With a guilty look the scarred Chunin bowed his head and Hiruzen went back to inspecting the test he was holding. It was a low blow and he felt no joy in dealing it, but sometimes you needed to go low for something to sink in. For a while after that things were silent again, but this time Irika was the one to break it. "Teaching Naruto is difficult, but I am not blameless. I try to see a boy, Hokage-sama, but sometimes I see my mother. A burning village. I know that there is more than to him than what is sealed inside of Naruto, and I will work harder to see that more often." He looked up again, determination burning in his eyes. "I hope you will understand that it will take time, Hokage-sama, but I will try not to fail again." "There was no failure, you simply stumbled at hurdle. We all do at times. All we can do is what you have stated you plan to do and try. Nobody can ask more." The old man answered with a kind smile. He blew out a ring of smoke and held out one of the tests to Irika. "Channel chakra through that, could you?" Confused, the Chunin accepted the paper and concentrated for a moment. To his surprise, the entire test burst into flames and quickly burned up. "Hokage-sama. I am sorry, I didn't mean," he stammered incredulously as he brushed the smoldering ashes off his legs. "I don't know what happened." Hiruzen frowned at the ashes and began to separate Naruto's test into two piles. "Sadly, you proved my theory, Irika-kun. The test I just handed you was made out of chakra paper. In fact, it appears all of these are too." He tapped the larger of the two piles. Irika shook his head quickly, as if literally trying to shake off the confusion. "What? That doesn't make any sense. Why would anyone print a test onto chakra paper? Determining chakra nature isn't even in the curriculum." Hiruzen frowned and held up one of the tests. "While it is rarely employed, chakra paper has another use. We use it to test what chakra natures we have affinity for, but this only possible because the paper in question is very easy to channel chakra into. This very fact also makes it so that any jutsu placed on it that does not damage the paper remains for much longer than on other material. This makes it very suitable for genjutsu." Irika muttered with a look of dawning horror. "But surely the instructors," he grit his teeth and tried to rein in his anger. "We don't teach much genjutsu beyond dispelling it, and, even if we did, nobody in Naruto's class is anywhere near that age. That only leaves the instructors." Hiruzen nodded sadly and handed Irika the test at the top of the larger pile. "The technique itself has worn off, but you can still feel a bit of it. Complex, subtle. Beyond an academy student, no matter the age." While Irika glared down at the paper, Hiruzen leaned back in his seat with a contemplative look. He took a puff, and then glanced at the corner of the room. Inu. Without a sound, a dog-masked Anbu dropped down from the ceiling. "Hokage-sama?" he asked, brushing back spiky white hair. The man was dressed no differently from the other Anbu, and only a small mark on the left side of his mask denoted his rank as captain. I want you to send people to gather up the academy's instructors. Pull them out of their beds if you must. Force is authorized if you are met with resistance. If Hiruzen hadn't worked with the ANBU captain for so long, he would have thought his orders had gone unheard as the man didn't so much as twitch to acknowledge them. As it was, he knew the shinobi was simply going over every single aspect of his orders as fast as he could. Looking underneath the underneath, as he liked to put it. Ibiki, then? The captain finally drawled. Hiruzen considered it for a moment, puffing on his pipe and drawing the smoke deep into his lungs. No, that's a bit much, I think. Wake up one of the Yamanaka interrogators. Being Hokage came with a lot of unpleasant duties, so he would rather not add to them by sending Konoha shinobi to be tortured by their comrades. Besides, while their actions were awful and he would see them pay, he could hardly call it treason. Inu nodded his understanding and signaled 2 more ANBU down before they all vanished. This day did not seem as long just a little while ago. Hiruzen mused as he dragged his hand down his face. When he turned his attention back to Irika, he found the instructor still trapped somewhere between outrage and shock. What now? Irika muttered. How are we supposed to fix this? The damage this could have done to his education, I mean, it's a good thing we caught it fairly early, but this will still have messed up Naruto's understanding of the basics. The Hokage nodded and put down his pipe. If we are to fire instructors after this whole fiasco, I cannot ask you or any of the innocent instructors to split your time between classes and helping Naruto catch up. You'll all be busy enough. Do not fret, Irika-kun. I will find someone. The question is just who would be best. Irika nodded, not entirely satisfied with that. In a way, he would have liked to be the one to do it. It could be a good way to learn to see Naruto as his own person, and he felt like, by not noticing this, he had failed the boy as his sensei in a big way. The Hokage was right, though. He was certain they would be out a few instructors after the investigation, and that meant the remaining ones would have to divide the unattended classes between them. Odds were they would be rather busy for a while. Still, he thought, as he straightened in his seat. If I can help, I can do my best to find someone who can. He rubbed his chin. I think it would be best to pick someone who's not too fond of traditional teaching. Naruto's good at the physical stuff, but put him in a lecture and only Shikamaru Nara will fall asleep more quickly. Hiruzen nodded, lost in thought. I agree. It also needs to be someone who he can look up to. He's got a role model in the 4th Hokage, considering he tends to go on about him, but a living one would be good too. Perhaps someone with a connection to him, or who can easily make one. He reached for his pipe again, and his finger brushed against the mission folders, bringing them to his attention once more. A connection, of course. How could I have forgotten? It's not a direct one, but that might be even better. Yes, she would be good. They would both benefit from that, I believe. The return of Inu snapped both men out of their thoughts. Mission in progress, Hokage-sama. They are being rounded up and a few Yamanaka interrogators have been woken up and told mind-walking is restricted during the interrogations for now. The captain stated in an emotionless drawl. The Hokage nodded. Thank you, Inu, he said, without turning to address the ANBU captain as he took up his position in the shadows once more. Well, Irika-kun, I think we've had quite the talk, all things considered. At least I have someone in mind for Naruto now. Irika opened his mouth to ask who, but a soft knock cut him off. Hokage-sama, Yumi said as she stepped into the office. Outpost 3 has just sent a report saying Mitarashi's team passed them not too long ago. The Hokage brightened at the little bit of good news. It had been quite the heavy evening, so far. Ah, thank you, Yumi. Their status? A bit banged up, but fine, apparently. Hiruzen nodded and turned an apologetic smile on Irika. I'm sorry, Irika-kun, I don't mean to throw you out. Irika chuckled softly and stood up out of the chair. No worries, Hokage-sama. I doubt Enko would be happy if she had to wait to debrief. He had absolutely no desire to be in the same room as the unstable Tokubetsu Jounin. That woman scared the crap out of him. Hiruzen waited until the scar-faced Chunin pulled the door shut behind him before turning to his secretary again. Yumi, could you please grab Hoshiko-san's file for me? I want to check something before they arrive. The slender brunette nodded and made a small note on her clipboard. Of course, sir. She'd long ago learned not to bother asking why the Hokage needed things. Half of his reasons she barely understood, and the others he wouldn't tell her about to minimize safety risks. She walked out and came back after only a few minutes with a simple brown folder with the kanji for fire and an ID number on the front. Hiruzen immediately opened it and began to read, flipping through the shinobi's accomplishments. What he planned to ask was something most would consider a chore, so he had to make sure it had a clear benefit. It wasn't long before his reading was interrupted when someone literally threw his door open. Enko Mitarashi and team return. A husky female voice announced obnoxiously loudly. Hiruzen sighed and slid the folder into a drawer. He'd found what he was looking for, but meetings with Enko tended to be a bit draining. The grinning woman strode purposely into his office, tossing a sealing scroll up and down in her hand. Her violet hair was done up in a spiky, fan ponytail, and her bangs framed her face. She wore very little, in fact. A trenchcoat a shade of brown lighter than her eyes, a mesh bodysuit that reached from her neck to her thighs, an orange miniskirt and gray shin guards. If not for the shallow cut on her left cheek, it would have been impossible to determine she'd just returned from a mission. Behind her followed two men, both wearing Chunin flak jackets and appearing slightly singed. Both had long hair, but the first man's hair was spiky and black while the second had dark hair that covered his right eye. Hiruzen raised an eyebrow at the two and laced his fingers together. Izumo Kotetsu, what happened this time? Izumo looked away sheepishly while Kotetsu grumbled under his breath and pulled on his black spikes. Hiruzen had to bite back a laugh as he watched the pair. The two always seemed to come back from their missions with some sort of hilariously embarrassing injuries. Hiruzen had come dangerously close to losing his cool when Guy had briefed him on how Kotetsu had tripped in a battle with an enemy shinobi and taken a rather literal boatload of saban. I did warn them, Hokage-sama. The last person to enter the room said. Her voice was soft and low and laced with a hint of amusement. The girl was very tall for her age, standing at a few inches over the rest of her team. Beyond that, it was hard to determine much about her. She seemed to have a nice body, but it was hard to be sure, because she literally covered up from head to toe. The girl wore a Chunin flak jacket, but a modified one with attached long, gray sleeves and a hood of the same color. Underneath the hood he could see the edge of a black headband with silver flames, and the plate of her hitaite had been sewn into her left sleeve. Loose blue pants, bound at ankles, covered her legs. A blade with a guardless black hilt was strapped to her back. She wore a pauldron on her right shoulder and bracers on both arms, all of which were dark green and bore a golden, burning crown. Fingerless gloves covered her hand and the lower half of her face went hidden behind a face mask. Between the mask and her headband, only a thin strip of skin around her bright red eyes was visible. Only if you looked there or at her bare fingers could you see that her skin was darker than any of the other shinobis in the room. Of course. Members of your clan are always a bit of a friendly fire hazard, Hoshiko-san, Hiruzen said with a wry grin. It's not Hikari's fault, Anko protested, gesturing at Izumo and Kotetsu. She told us the reach of her jutsu. Tweedledum and Tweedlemoron just found shelter on a building where they stored explosives. Hey! Both of the scorched Chunin cried as they turned to glare at her, but Anko did her best to look innocent and ignored them. Of course, Anko trying to seem innocent just made her look more devious and Hiruzen couldn't quite keep in a laugh this time. My, that certainly is unfortunate. I take it everything else went well. Anko beamed and put the scroll she'd been playing with down on the desk. As ordered, a bunch of dead bandits in a scroll. Want fries with that? He ignored the last part and inspected the scroll for a moment. Very good. The camp? Hikari shrugged and chuckled under her breath. Probably still on fire. Should stay that way for a day or two. The Hokage asked a few more questions about the mission before he decided to move on. Well then, I imagine anything else will probably be in your report, Anko. You all probably want to head home for the night. Izumo looked immensely relieved at that and mumbled something about guard duty, earning him an elbow to the ribs from his friend. You all did good. Go get some rest. Oh, not you, Hikari. I'd like to speak to you for a moment. The dusky-skinned Chunin paused on her way to the door and nodded slowly. All right. Good night, guys. Good working with you, Hoshiko, Izumo said with a small wave. We didn't get much chance, so come slack off with me at the gate sometime, yeah? It gets bork, Kotetsu added before his partner dragged him out by the back of his shirt, lecturing him all the way out of the office and down the stairs. Anko lingered for a moment, uncertainly glancing between the Hokage and Hikari. Was there something you wanted to ask Hikari about the mission, sir? Hiruzen shook his head and smiled calmly at her. No, just something I would like her help with if possible. Anko still looked a bit uncertain and Hikari looked back at her, face mask twitching in a way Hiruzen had quickly learned meant that she was smiling. Anko, it's fine. Go home, yeah? Don't you have children to eat in the morning? They are the tastiest when they're still groggy, Anko mused with a wide grin. She walked out with a wave, calling back over her shoulder. Still on for lunch, right? Yes, so long as you realize I'm not making fucking dango again, Anko. Learn to appreciate the food of the gods, you heathen. She threw the door shut behind her, and Hiruzen laughed as he gestured for Hikari to take a seat. My apologies. I didn't realize you were together. I won't keep you from each other long. The covered-up Chunin choked on her own spit and nearly fell out of her seat, coughing loudly. It's not like that. Anko's a friend. She just comes over a lot. Hiruzen gave her a bemused look, and what little of Hikari's face turned red as she blushed. And not like that, I have a boyfriend. I like to cook. Apparently I make ungodly awesome dango. Hiruzen made a noise of understanding and pulled out the file. It was probably best not to embarrass the girl too much, though poking the more serious shinobi until they reacted was always fun. The fact that he was the Hokage and, therefore, nobody would call him on it just made it better. "I would like you to read this, please," he said, handing her Naruto's records. She gave the file a confused look, but dutifully accepted it and began reading over the various papers inside. Meanwhile, Hiruzen took the time to study the kunoichi before him. Up close he could see her face mask had darkened with blood in a way that suggested they took a mean punch to the mouth, and a thin rivulet of blood down her arm, over her gloved right hand. Mostly he focused on her eyes. Red, piercing, and seemingly capable of looking deep inside whoever they looked at, now narrowed in determined concentration. He could still remember them big and filled with angry tears, not all that long ago. He always felt a strange mix of pride and sadness when he looked at the girl. Konoha really seemed to produce young prodigies that would go far as shinobi. In recent years he'd caught himself thinking the word got thrown around a bit too freely at times, but with Hikari he couldn't deny it was fitting. Despite not graduating the academy early, largely because her father had intended to keep further pressure off of her in school, she had been the rookie of the year by a mile. Even before that she'd shown remarkable skill with her clan's specialty, and Kekkei Genkai at a very early age, and the fact that she made Chunin less than 4 months after leaving the academy only served to prove that her skill wasn't restricted to the classroom. Still, he had to pity the girl at times. She was so young and yet she was trying to prove so much. The situation she found herself in with her clan was a truly terrible one, and it didn't seem to be one that would resolve itself quickly. Of course, there was also the fact that her family's situation meant quite a few shinobi were uncomfortable working with her, and that she ran a lot of solo missions. Too many, he felt. When I think about it, I suppose it's not strange that she bonded with Enko. Hikari reached up to run a hand through her hair as she read, pushing back her hood in the process. Her hair was dark green and short, littered with red highlights which matched her eyes. She kept it styled into a pixie cut, and it spilled over her headband slightly on the right. Without the shadows of her hood, it became clear she had a scar running from somewhere at the center of her forehead to her nose. "Is there a reason you're making me?" She paused when she reached the last test and eyed it quizzically. "Sir? I think this might have been tampered with." Hiruzen nodded. "Indeed it has. In fact, quite a few have been." He settled into his chair and began to explain the day's events, watching the girl's eyes narrow as she learned of the very deliberate sabotage by the instructors. "Hokage-sama, that's terrible and all, but I'm not sure why I'm here if all of this has been found out already," she muttered, glancing down at the test again. Hiruzen grinned and put her file on the desk. "Well, the academy will clearly be going through a bit of a reorganization soon, so I can't ask one of the instructors to take time out to help Naruto catch up. Therefore I would like you to tutor him for a while." Her body language all but screamed surprise and Hikari's jaw worked under her mask. Sir? You want me to tutor Uzumaki Naruto? I'm no instructor." Hiruzen stood up out of his seat and walked over to the window. "I am aware of this. While I would expect you to at least help him with the more theoretical class work, I think Naruto will always be better at the practical side of things, so you'd best focus on that. Chakra control in particular, I would imagine." He folded his hands at his back, watching the lights in the village go out one by one as people went to bed. "Hikari, you are an amazing kunoichi for your age. Do you realize how quickly you secured your promotion?" The green-haired teenager crossed her arms under her chest and shrugged. "People were promoted when they were younger than me. Hell, people graduated when they were younger than me." Hiruzen looked at her reflection in the window and shook his head. "Many of the cases you are referring to occurred in less than peaceful times. War has a way of fast-tracking the promising students, Hikari. Don't compare apples with oranges." He turned back to her and gave the kunoichi a stern look. "Like many of your clan members, the amount of chakra you have is astounding, and you have learned to use it effectively. Your skill with your clan's jutsu and Kekkei Genkai is truly admirable, and you have exceeded many older shinobi at your area of expertise." He counted his points off on his fingers as he listed them. "Naruto looks up to strong people, so that will appeal to him. Furthermore, you are responsible, punctual and professional, which I hope will rub off on him a little." With each of her better attributes the Hokage listed, the girl seemed to sit up a little straighter. "That is kind of you to say, Hokage-sama. However, with all due respect, but I think I would be wasting my time helping this kid. Being a tutor is hardly part of the plan," she said, shaking her head. "Besides, maybe this is better suited to someone who actually wants to be an instructor later. Like I said, it's just not in my plan." Hiruzen chuckled and stroked his beard. "Ah, yes, your plan? Jounin at 18 in 2 years, ANBU at 19 and then on to Jounin Commander eventually, right?" He couldn't say he was entirely surprised that she'd responded like that. Hikari valued her career, perhaps a bit more than was healthy. Still, he prepared for this. "Well, I suppose it was a good thing I wasn't done then." "Inu. The dog-masked ANBU appeared once more and Hiruzen beckoned him over to the desk. Inu, I'm certain you remember Operation Wildfire. Please recount the last part of your report to me. The ANBU nodded and clasped his hands at his back as he began to speak. Due to poor intelligence, we were unprepared for the sheer range and speed of the target's kenjutsu, and lost Kiru and Rayon in the first minutes of contact. We changed tactics and kept the target occupied until we were joined by Mitarashi Enko, Gecko Hate and Hoshiko Hikari. He paused and turned so he was looking directly at Hikari when he continued. Hoshiko-san's excellently executed, large-scale techniques, speed and improvisation wound up saving more than of us and made her instrumental in taking down the target. Given her mission record and her performance on this mission, I highly recommend promoting Hoshiko-san to Tokubetsu Jounin in preparation for an eventual placement in ANBU. Judging by the way her mask had stretched out and her eyes had widened, Hikari's jaw had all but hit the floor. But I really? The white-haired ANBU shrugged. Ma, don't think too much of it. I just gave my opinion. And I do not agree. Not entirely. Hiruzen added. Your drive is admirable, but you are too focused on your career. I can send you on month-long missions and you'll be right back here for a new one the day after you return, just to prove you can. Whether you want to prove it to me or your clan is irrelevant. Furthermore, you work solo far too much. He flipped her file open and pointed at a list of her completed missions. I can't deny that you've mastered some powerful jutsu, but you need to learn to utilize them in a way that leaves your team capable of assisting. At the very least, don't make the jutsu a danger to them as they were today. He continued sternly. While I certainly understand your reasoning behind working alone, nothing will improve if you avoid your allies. My Jounin need to be able to lead. To know the people under their command. Even ANBU's greatest strength is their ability to act as a unit even while apart. Hiruzen sighed and shook his head. Hikari, meanwhile, had stiffened in her seat with her hands curled into fists, and her eyes blazing with anger. With their bright red color it was honestly rather frightening, but Hiruzen had looked into the angry faces of far more terrible opponents. You have so much potential. The aging Hokage lamented. But I think you don't even know what you're fighting for at times. There's no passion when you talk about this goal of yours. Just to drive anger sometimes. It's just like talking to that girl who barged into my office in angry tears only a few years ago. It just makes me wonder, why do you fight, Hikari? Beyond the anger driving you, why is it so important to keep rushing forward as you have been? She continued to glare at the Hokage for a few minutes, but she didn't answer. Finally the teenager scoffed loudly, turning her angry gaze to her lap. Either she had no good answer to give, or she didn't feel like sharing the one she did have. A bit of both, probably. The old man thought as he stood up out his seat again. He walked around the desk and placed a hand on Hikari's shoulder, prompting her to look up. You're only young once, Hikari, and shinobi have to grow up so quickly anyway. I can't say I wouldn't be angry in your position, but don't make it all about that. It won't lead anywhere good and you'll miss out on important opportunities. He squeezed her shoulder gently and smiled down at her. For example, you could miss out on an opportunity to take a tutoring mission and strike a deal concerning your promotion. Hikari's head snapped up so quickly Hiruzen was almost certain he heard her neck crack. Don't get too excited. I'll promise you this. You tutor Naruto for 2 years. Not constantly, of course, as you'll probably want to take missions every now and then, but at least in the first year I want you to spend a few days a week with him. At the end of the 2 years, if Naruto's results are good and I see improvement in you, I will promote you to Tokubetsu Jounin. Hiruzen smiled as he watched the young Kunoichi's eyes widen in surprise. Not quite your plan, but I think it would be good for you to slow down a bit. The green-haired Kunoichi's face kept switching back and between hope and hesitation as she looked up at the Hokage. That is, she paused to clear her throat and steady her voice before she started again. That is quite an offer, Hokage-sama. You seem to believe I'll change a lot in 2 years. Hiruzen chuckled and patted her shoulder before he walked back around to his side of the desk. I'm always amazed by how young people think they'll never change when they are the most dynamic people around. Besides, I think you'll be amazed by the effect Naruto will have on you. At least he hoped she would, because part of him could see her dropping him from the monument too. Hikari considered her options for a moment, chewing on an already split lip beneath her mask. On the one hand, she still felt she would be wasting her time as a tutor, but it was clear that the Hokage badly wanted her to do this. Why, she still wasn't sure, because she'd probably make a shit role model, but arguing really hadn't gotten her anywhere. Besides, she now had a clear chance at promotion. The downside to that being that it went against a plan that had been in place since the very first time she'd activated her Kekkei Genkai. A plan she'd had for most of her life, but it was only a 2-year delay, and maybe she could cut down on that if she did well. Well, there's one more factor, she thought, glancing at Naruto's file. Going to such lengths just to sabotage a kid you didn't like was a shit thing to do. Could she really say she was much better when When presented with the chance directly asked to help, she decided her own career was more important. The kid was an Uzumaki too. Probably not a direct relation, considering the hair, but he still had the name. She let out a long, weary sigh and nodded. I am angry, Hokage-sama. In fact, I probably won't be done being angry for some time. However, if that anger becomes a hindrance rather than a drive, then what's the point? She chuckled humorlessly and shook her head. I still think you're overestimating the effect this kid and I will have on one another, but you know him better than I do. I'll help the kid. She put the file down on his desk and stood up, stretching. You'd better be ready to promote me 2 years from now, though. She decided to leave out the if not sooner for now. Wonderful. Hiruzen beamed. I'll ensure Naruto comes by tomorrow so you two can meet. Please be here after the academy closes for the day. Oh, and I'm putting a limit of 1 per month on your solo missions. Consider it my way of helping you deal with teamwork. Hikari's right eye twitched in annoyance, but she did an admirable job of keeping her tone neutral as she bowed and turned to leave. Of course, Hokage-sama. Good night. To you as well, Inu, and thank you again for the recommendation. See you tomorrow, Hikari. I'm sure you'll hit it off well, Hiruzen said. Hikari paused with her hand on the door and chuckled. Well, we do have one thing in common. She put her hood up again, revealing a large section of her flak jacket, and the dark blue shirt she wore underneath had been cut away to reveal part of her upper back. There, carved directly into her dusky skin, was part of a large, incredibly complex ceiling array with a hint of the spiral at the center that peeked just over the bottom edge of the gap in her jacket and shirt. Both of us wouldn't be where we are without the Uzumaki clan. Hell of a first day. Hiruzen sighed loudly, something he had been doing a lot in the past 2 days. He adjusted the wide hat on his head and took in the absolutely ruined training ground. A massive spider web of cracks fanned out from the center, as if something massive had dropped down on it from great height. 2 narrow scorch marks further marred the clearing, one on the very edge and the second was closer to the center. Not far from that mark lay an unconscious Naruto Uzumaki, breathing quickly but apparently unharmed. Crouched over him, protecting his body with her own, was his new tutor Hikari Hoshiko. Her condition was a little less favorable than Naruto's. She too was breathing quickly, but she also had a few fresh bruises and shallow cuts. If the dirt and pebbles in her hair was any indication, she'd bounced along the ground a few times. The skin on her arms and fingertips appeared burned in places, though thankfully those didn't seem too bad. The tip of Kakashi's tanto was pressing into the side of her neck. Another ANBU member was at her side with his blade held up for a downward thrust. Not that he was in any position to follow through, as with the hand not supporting her weight she was holding a machete to his genitals. Hiruzen winced reflexively at that. No man wanted a blade there. Or just in the general area of it, really. Well, it seems Naruto has had quite the eventful first day, the Hokage remarked calmly as he stood directly across from the crouched Hikari. I think it would be best if you lowered the blade, Hikari. Her dark red eyes narrowed at him in a truly impressive glare, and the young Chunin shook her head. With all due respect? No. They can step back. I'm not lowering anything. The ANBU at her side shifted his balance, and immediately regretted his action as Hikari raised her blade just a little higher. Okay. Hiruzen said easily before turning to the ANBU. You are all dismissed. If there are further issues, I'm certain Inu and I can handle it. The order was obeyed without question as all the ANBU took a step back, one of them far more carefully than the others, and vanished. It was only when Kakashi sheathed his tanto and joined the Hokage at his side that Hikari lowered her machete, and dropped back on her but with a groan. Fuck. That probably took about 10 years off my life, yeah? She muttered as he ran a slightly trembling hand through her hair. She hadn't had much of a plan beyond threaten to turn the asshole who got too close into a eunuch. I'd say you're very stress-resistant if it only took 10 off. Hiruzen chuckled. He brushed some of the sharp, broken stones aside and sat down across from the teenager. Now how about you tell me all about it? Almost immediately Hikari's eyes narrowed again in anger. I think I'm due an explanation first, Hokage-sama. She glanced at the unconscious blonde. Hiruzen followed her gaze and nodded with a grim expression. It had been such a nice day up until now. Flashback. Are you sure about the amount? That seems like a lot of spice. The Hokage muttered as he scribbled something down. From where she stood near his desk, leaning against the wall, Hikari nodded. Yes, sir. Don't worry, it seems like a lot, but if you let the meat soak it up it's not so bad. Her face mask twitched in a way that Hiruzen had quickly learned meant she was smiling. Besides, there's always the rice if it's still too much for you. Hiruzen chuckled. Well, I'm an old man. I have no intention of getting killed by my own food. The girl had clearly been a bit tense about this assignment when she arrived, and he had decided to calm her down a bit by finding something to talk about. Food seemed like a safe bet, and he was always happy to pick up a recipe, since his late wife hadn't been much of an asset in the kitchen, and he barely knew pork from beef himself. There was a sharp knock at the door, and at his invitation it swung open to reveal an ANBU member with dark hair tied in a short ponytail and a weasel mask. "Hokage-sama, I'm here with Uzumaki-san as requested." As if on cue, a blonde blur shot by him and ran up to the ornate desk. "Hey, Gigi. Is my tutor ready for me?" "Hello, Naruto." Hiruzen gave the boy a smile and then turned his attention back to the weasel-masked ANBU. "Thank you. I'm sure you expected more exiting work on your first day. Did you stop to talk to your brother?" The man shifted uncomfortably and shook his head. "I thought it unwise to do so on duty, sir." The Hokage frowned for a moment, but then nodded. "The mask comes off, my boy. Trust me when I say that you'll wish for moments to stop and talk to people soon enough. At any rate, thank you again. I'm sure your captain is eager to get you used to your duties." Dismissed. The ANBU nodded and vanished, allowing the Hokage to turn his attention back to the hyper-blonde at his desk. "Naruto, allow me to introduce you to Hikari Hoshiko. She will be tutoring you for the foreseeable future." He gestured at the young kunoichi, and she greeted Naruto with a quick jerk of her head. "Nice to meet ya, kid." "Whoa!" Naruto's eyes went wide as he craned his head up to look at the tall teen. "You're really tall." He bounded over to her and smiled widely. "So, you're gonna help me get caught up so I can take the old man's hat, huh?" Hikari chuckled. She had to give it to the kid, he certainly had the right mindset. "Well, I don't know about that, but I am going to be helping you, yes. You've got your stuff from school, right?" she asked. Naruto nodded vigorously, patting a beat-up messenger bag at his side, and Hikari pushed off from the wall. "Then I think we should get started, yeah? Unless there was something else?" She looked to Hiruzen, but the old man shook his head. "No, I think you're right. The sooner you get started the better." He walked around his desk and placed a hand on Naruto's head. "Naruto, Hikari is one of our most promising young kunoichi, so listen to her well. Is there anything you'd like to ask before I let you two get started?" Immediately the blonde started to rattle off questions. "How old are you? What's with your outfit? Are you cold? Can I hold your sword? Can you teach me to use one? Have you been on many cool missions? Can you teach me cool jutsu?" He barely took a breath between questions. Wide-eyed, Hikari turned from the genin questioning her to the Hokage, who was concealing his amusement rather poorly. "Kami kid, take a breath, yeah?" She waited for Naruto to stop babbling and ran a hand through her green hair. "I might teach you jutsu, if you do WL. I'd rather not talk about my missions. I might teach you to use a sword too, but you can't hold mine. You'd cut your hand off. I'm not talking about the outfit, and I'm 16. She saw him gearing up to continue his questioning, not bothered by or outright ignoring her short answers, and quickly flicked him in the forehead. "Oh, shut up, yeah?" Naruto pouted a little. "Aw, come on. I have way more to ask, and I'd be real careful with your sword," and she flicked him again, and he glared at her. This was so not over. Hiruzen chuckled softly. "Well then, I'm sure you can ask those on the way. I fear I have other meetings." Naruto nodded and grabbed Hikari's hand, trying to drag her out of the room while. "Come on. Let's go already." He began dragging her out of the room, and the tall kunoichi managed to shoot the Hokage one last, slightly overwhelmed, look before the door slammed shut behind them. "Over here should be good, right?" Naruto asked as he stepped out onto a training field near the Hokage's tower. He was nowhere near experienced enough in body language to tell, but Hikari sounded a little surprised when she spoke. Yet didn't even know they had training fields here. He wasn't exactly surprised, considering he had only found this field while hiding on his birthday. The fact that it was a bit beat up, with cracks running through the field and rusted weapons littered here and there, probably meant that it was quite old. Naruto didn't care though. He eagerly sat down by a stump at the edge of the field and dumped his books on the floor. Hikari sat down across from him and eyed the old, weathered books for a moment before she spoke. "Alright, let's figure out how we're gonna." "I already thought of that," Naruto shouted as he jumped to his feet and unrolled an absurdly long scroll. "I worked it all out. I'll probably need to get warm after class, so we can start with something to get me going. Then of course, taijutsu. I'm gonna kick everyone's ass. Then we can rest a bit while you teach me about jutsu and..." Hikari warily nudged the unrolled section of the scroll. "How long was that thing anyway? A foot? Kid, I don't think." "Then maybe dinner. Have you been to Ichiraku's?" "Doesn't matter. Then we practice jutsu for a bit." "Kid, seriously. And then maybe some training with traps and..." "Oh, shut up." Hikari's leg shot out without warning and knocked both of his out from underneath him. Naruto barely had time to squeak in surprise before he landed flat on his back and all the air abruptly left his lungs. He blinked in confusion and found himself staring up at the tip of a dull gray machete with a black hilt that would have speared him right in the head if Hikari had followed through. There, taijutsu lesson over. The green-haired kunoichi growled as she sheathed her blade. You're dead. She sat back down and glared at Naruto while he gasped for air. You're a terrible teacher. He croaked as he sat up, rubbing his back. I don't feel like I learned anything from that. Well, that wasn't entirely true. He'd learned he stood no chance of beating her. He hadn't even seen the kick coming. And people say learning something new never hurts. Hikari ignored the remark and reached forward to pick up one of his books. Listen, yeah? Hokage-sama himself told that my main job is to help you with this. She waved the textbook. So, no matter what, this is the first thing we do when we meet up, yeah? The little blonde slumped and pouted. But it's boring, he protested. I don't want to have to go over all of it again. He didn't even really understand why they had to go over it all again. It wasn't his fault that the instructors had sabotaged him. Why did he have to do extra work because of it? Hikari watched him go from pouting and bratty to moody and angry, glaring at the ground, and sighed. Maybe she should cut the kid a break. Yeah, I suppose it is kind of boring, but you don't want to let your classmates beat you in this, do you? The kid shook his head and she smiled behind her face mask. Then you gotta do it, even if it sucks. Besides, it can be useful. What if Hokage-sama ever sends you to deal with a target in, say, Suna, and you get lost because you don't know the terrain? Naruto's head shot up and he stared at her with wide eyes. What? Like a person? Why would Gigi do something like that? Hikari raised an eyebrow, though with her face covered as it was the action almost went unnoticed. Naruto was definitely old enough for the instructors to have put him and his classmates through the exercise of killing small creatures to get the kids prepared for killing people. So what was the problem? Kid, why do you want to be a shinobi? Confused by the sudden change in topic, Naruto pointed at the Hokage monument. I'm going to be the best Hokage there ever was and make everyone acknowledge me, Databeo. I'm gonna be just like Gigi and the fourth Hokage and keep the village safe. Well, they've all killed people, Hikari said, indicating the monument with a jerk of her head. So have I, though probably not nearly as many. Shinobi are not the good guys, kid. She watched his spirits dampen and chuckled softly as she reached out and ruffled his hair. Well, not always anyway. We do a lot to help people too, and of course we protect this place. But there are very few shinobi without blood on their hands. It's best if you learn that early on. The blonde gave her the evil eye for a moment as he tried to straighten his hair. You've killed people? He asked eventually, giving up on salvaging his hair. I specialize in capture and assassination missions, she answered, playing with the bracer on her right arm. It's why I said I wasn't going to talk about those. It's not something a kid should hear. She chuckled when he grumbled about not being a kid. I never really thought about it, Naruto added hesitantly. I guess it makes sense, but it's not very easy to take in. Hikari finished his sentence and Naruto nodded. She could see where the kid was coming from, even if this wasn't something that bothered her too much. Besides, she was going to be spending time with him anyway, so she could always see about getting him to move past it. Look, it's something you won't have to worry about for quite some time yet. She reached for his hair again, but he smacked her hand and she laughed softly. Talk to your teachers. I'm sure you're not the first kid to have reservations about this part of the job. In fact, it's a good thing that you do. She leaned back on her hands and closed her eyes as she basked in the light of the slowly setting sun. Sometimes people have to die, but that doesn't mean we have to go around wasting life. When she got no response, she cracked an eye open and found Naruto still pondering things. Well, we've wasted enough time, I think. Let's get started, yeah? Naruto nodded and listlessly nudged one of his books. Are we really only going to do stuff from the textbooks? Is he still on that? Hikari resisted the urge to roll her eyes and decided to compromise. The kid had gotten a rough deal, after all. How about this? Each day we meet up, we start with the textbooks, and if you work hard, I'll help you do some practical stuff. How's that? She was nearly knocked back when Naruto shot up and hugged her. Really? You're the best, Hikari Nichin. He yelled, a wide grin on his face and his earlier reservations pushed to the back of his mind, though not forgotten. I'm gonna work really hard, you'll see. First off, I'm not your sister, she said as she peeled Naruto off with a slightly annoyed look. And secondly, you bet your ass you're gonna work hard. I'll make sure of that. Now come on. She shoved a book in his hands. You're gonna answer the questions at the end of chapter 1 and explain to me why you gave that answer. Naruto soon learned that his new tutor had not been kidding when she said she would ensure he worked hard. For every question he had to explain to her in detail why he thought his answer was correct. If it was, she praised him briefly and they moved on, but if it wasn't, she made him really think. If he couldn't come up with a new answer on his own, she gave him a hint about where he'd gone wrong and make him look it up in the book. If he still wasn't sure after that, she stopped the questions for a moment to explain it to him before they continued. She didn't let him skip any of the questions either, even making him do the ones that were never assigned in class. Soon enough, Naruto felt like his brain was melting, and as he got more tired, he became sloppier and started making more mistakes, meaning he would have to answer the question again. They went through one chapter, then another. When she suggested doing the next chapter as well, Naruto groaned loudly and slumped forward onto the book. Hikari laughed softly and nudged him. All right, I get the message. Naruto didn't stir, but she had an idea she was sure would get him up. We'll only do one more thing before we call it quits for today, yeah? He lifted his head just enough to look at her, and she smiled. It's something that doesn't involve books, I promise. Hikari could only stand the books for so long too, after all. It had given her a good impression of the kid's strong and weak points when it came to theory, though. He wasn't dumb, not really, just hasty. When he thought about it, he often managed to answer correctly, but it was clear he mostly worked by instinct rather than what the book told him. This was fine, except for when those instincts were just wrong. Sadly, it was also clear that she'd have quite a bit to do for the next few days, as she could already tell where his instructor's interference had damaged his understanding of the basics. That clearly made the more complicated scenarios harder to understand for him, and he was far too energetic to spend a long time sitting still and thinking about it. Still, nothing we can't fix, right? She pulled him up, dragged him over to the center of the field, and handed him a leaf. Naruto gave the leaf a thoroughly unimpressed look, before he turned his attention to Hikari again. This is a leaf. Hikari nodded absently as she searched through the pouches in her jacket. Yes, and it's central to an exercise you probably won't be doing in the academy for at least a few weeks. Aha! She pulled out an old lighter and lit the center of the leaf. Right, now use your chakra to keep from burning the entire leaf. Like a barrier that'll fuel the flame, but won't let it pass. Excited about learning something before the rest of his class did, Naruto eagerly set to work. The first leaf quickly burned, though, and he was forced to let it go. The second met the same fate, and the third seemed to burn slower, but he still couldn't keep it contained to the center. Cursing under his breath, as he nearly burned his fingers again, Naruto dropped the leaf and accepted a new one from Hikari. I think she's laughing at me. She was, because watching Naruto grow more and more annoyed with each leaf she handed him was kinda funny. However, she was also trying to work out why he wasn't making much progress. Sure, she could sense that the kid had a lot of chakra. Way above normal. She didn't need to bother checking in more detail when they were this close. That did explain why he was having such difficulty with the chakra control exercise, but she came from a clan with pretty sizable chakra reserves and they all managed it sooner or later. She was quite proud of her own control, actually, and she could just stab anyone who reminded her that it wasn't exactly medic Ning level. The kid, though his levels feel like a pretty experienced genin. And that was just a general impression. It could actually be more. That would certainly explain the problem. He'll probably have more chakra by the time he finishes the academy than I did at that age. Just as she was pondering ways to help him with that, she noticed something. Naruto's stomach was faintly glowing. Kid, hold up a second. What? I'm trying, Naruto said, but the green-haired kunoichi ignored him and lifted up his shirt. Hey! He tried to back away, vaguely wondering if he should be calling for an adult, but her next words froze him in place. Kid, did you know you have a seal here? She asked. Hikari lifted his shirt up a little higher and whistled softly in admiration. One hell of a seal. A seal? Naruto asked, trying to keep the leaf from burning while also bending down so he could see. A seal, yeah? Fuinjutsu, you know? Hikari muttered, frowning now. This was a containment seal. An extremely powerful one, and that was about all she could tell about it. It was extremely complicated. The fact that the kid apparently hadn't been aware of it up until now was more than a little worrying. Shit, I can see at least a dozen sub-seals. Why the hell would anyone put this on a kid? More importantly, what is it holding? Hikari Nichin? She looked up and found Naruto looking down at her, now actually looking a little concerned. Don't worry, kid. Just focus on the leaf while I see what this does. He nodded slowly and went back to work, while Hikari turned her attention back to his seal. It was an amazing piece of work, just from a technical standpoint. She could figure out the basic purpose of the seal and a few of the sub-seals. Containment, chakra suppression, and a lot of other functions besides she wasn't sure about. The young kunoichi made a few quick hand seals and her fingers glowed black. She was never going to figure this out if she didn't give it a poke or two. Besides, I'm brilliant at this. What's the worst that could happen? She began poking and prodding at the seal, trying to figure out why it had been placed on Naruto, and what it was supposed to do anyway. As she worked, though, she only grew more worried. Whoever placed this was brilliant. Not to mention strong. An absurd amount of chakra must have gone into this, and the needed control to create all these sub-seals must have been amazing. With each sub-seal she figured out, she learned that there were even more levels of sub-seals, all reinforcing the general design. She'd be at this for hours if she tried to crack it this way, if that was even a good idea. Naruto was trying his best not to twitch or laugh every time Hikari prodded him. He had heard Fuinjutsu mentioned in class once or twice, but he couldn't quite remember what it was used for. He certainly hadn't known that someone had placed a seal on him. Were the instructors trying to mess with him like that too? With a sigh, he continued concentrating on the leaf as the fire slowly spread out further. Getting his chakra to cooperate wasn't exactly easier with someone poking him every few seconds. Hikari was growing more and more frustrated with the seal. She started ignoring the layers upon layers of sub-seals and focused on the basics when she noticed something. This is Uzumaki-style sealing. If the seal existing in the first place had been worrying, this was cause for a red alert. Very few people still knew the details of this form of Fuinjutsu, and fewer still were this good at it. Unnaturally so, even. Who or what made this? Just then Naruto cursed and jerked when the fire reached his fingers and Hikari accidentally dragged a finger over two of the sub-seals. They flickered, their glow faded, and then the entire seal pulsed. Oh shit! Chakra burst free with unrestrained force and hurled the green-haired Kunoichi like a ragdoll. She hit the ground hard twice and rolled to a stop right at the edge of the clearing. Okay, Al. She slowly picked herself up and tried to regain her bearings after smacking her head none too gently during her unexpected flight. And then the ground suddenly cracked between her hands. She staggered to her feet and could only stare dumbly at what she saw. Naruto was bent over, hands on his head and mouth open in a silent scream as a vortex of red and blue chakra swirled around him. The red tendrils lashed out at random as if trying to break free, and each time they struck the field they left more and deeper cracks. Oh shit, kid! She tried to run towards him, but was almost immediately forced back when one of the red tendrils lashed out at her. It smashed into the ground and immediately shot back up, trying to hit her again, but she ducked and it merely grazed her arm before it pulled back. Even that light touch caused pain to shoot through her arm, though, and she hissed as she studied the damage. The skin was bright red and sensitive to the touch. It almost felt like something between a welt and a burn. Okay, that hurts. That chakra doesn't even feel human. It took a while for that thought to fully register, and when it did she cursed loudly. Fuck, it's not human chakra. They saddled me with the village's bloody Jinchuriki? Another swipe from one of the tendrils nearly took her legs out from underneath her, and she growled in frustration. She pulled her hood over her face and crouched low, hands in the dragon seal. Enough of this, Hoshiakari Hain. Starlight feathers, the large seal on her back glowed, two streaks of fire shot out from between her shoulders, and in a burst of speed she cleared the distance from the edge to the center of the field. Closer to Naruto it was like walking into a hurricane, and even with the fire propelling her forward, she had to dig in her heels to keep from being pushed back. The red chakra was crawling over Naruto like a shroud, and she had to bite through the pain as she plunged a hand through it to touch his waist. If I can just undo whatever I did, she strained as hard as she could, but it was still like trying to push through thick, hot mud. She could feel her hand burning even through her gloves, but she was so close. I'm not letting this place get destroyed because I accidentally screwed up our Jinchuriki's seal and let the nine-tailed fox out. My career is not freaking ending that way. The moment she actually touched him, Naruto's head snapped up and Hikari froze for a moment. His eyes had turned blood red and his pupils had become little more than slits. He snarled at her, and the tendrils of red chakra all pulled back to strike at once. Then her glowing fingers passed over the messed up part of the seal, the sub-seals reformed, and it was over almost immediately. The connection between the blonde and the red chakra was almost violently cut off, and his eyes quickly turned blue again, before they rolled back in his skull and he passed out. Hikari slumped over as well and wound up more or less crouched over him, the flames on her back dying out slowly. Ah fuck, come on kid, don't be dead. She quickly felt for a pulse and breathed a sigh of relief when she felt the steady drum against her fingers. She would have had a pretty tough time looking at herself in the mirror if her mistake had wound up killing the kid. Her relief was short-lived, though, as the field was suddenly surrounded by members of ANBU. Hikari Hoshiko, a woman with a bird mask, began. You are to hand the child over to us and await debriefing. Hikari raised an eyebrow at her and crouched lower over Naruto, protectively. Right, that's one option. I was gonna go with plan B and march straight to the Hokage with the kid. Feel free to keep standing here, though. This is not a request. One of the masked shinobi shined over to her, but before he could bend down to pick Naruto up, he found himself with a machete pressed against something he very much did not wish to lose. Hikari glared at him and lifted the blade a little higher when it looked like his companions were about to step in. Wanna talk about those options again? Well, there's always option C. A bored-sounding voice stated right before something sharp and cold was pressed to her neck. You won't like option C. The green-haired Kunoichi's eyes widened in shock, and she very slowly turned her head to find a dog-masked ANBU with spiky, white hair standing over her with the tip of his tanto pressed against her neck. She chuckled nervously as a bead of sweat rolled down her brow. Well, shit. Flashback end. Quite an eventful first day for you both, then. Hiruzen muttered softly after Hikari finished recounting her version of things. I imagined you'd find Naruto a bit much to deal with, but not quite like this. Hikari glared at the Hokage and crossed her arms under her chest. That would have been far less likely had you told me just who I was working with. She turned to look at the spot where the dog-masked Anbu was looking over a still unconscious Naruto's seal. The kid's going to wake up, right? Don't worry, Hikari, Naruto is much more resilient than you know, Hiruzen said with a kind smile, following her gaze. As to why I did not inform of you of Naruto's passenger, the smile made way for a stern frown. Strong as they are, Jinchuriki are still shinobi, and a shinobi's greatest weapon is still the element of surprise. I am sorry things turned out this way, but this information is not something I hand out freely. Hikari grunted, not exactly happy with the answer but well aware that there was little she could do about it. That seal. Did the fourth do that? She waited for Hiruzen to nod and shook her head in disbelief. Unbelievable. How did he even do that? It makes my clan's seals look like. Hokage-sama. The ANBU captain finally stood up from his examination and made his way back over to them with Naruto in his arms. As far as I can tell, the seal is functioning as it should be. She accidentally blocked 2 sub-seals from the overall structure, and that seems to have caused a chain reaction. I see Fuinjutsu truly is a temperamental art. Too bad Jiraiya isn't here at the moment. Hiruzen muttered as he pushed himself to his feet with a drawn-out groan. That took so much less effort back when he was still young. At any rate, I think we should let Hikari get her injuries checked out. Inu, would you be so kind as to bring Naruto home? The ANBU nodded and leaped into the trees with another word. Hikari watched him go and then climbed to her feet as well, being very careful with her injured arm. I'll swing by tomorrow, Hokage-sama. See how he is. Yes, if you could, that would be great. He'll probably be a bit dazed when he wakes up, Hiruzen said, staring off into the distance in the vague direction of Naruto's apartment building. If he remembers anything, bring him by my office. If not, it's best to keep it that way. He lightly patted the young kunoichi on the arm and couldn't help but smile when she flinched. Now go get those checked out. Yes, sir. She took to the trees as well and left Hiruzen alone on the ruined training field, stroking his beard ponderously. Now how do I avoid the questions the council will undoubtedly ask about this incident? When Naruto woke up the following morning, he had never felt so well rested. He was not a morning person and generally spent most of the morning as a zombie, but today he felt as if someone had given him a caffeine shot right before he woke up. He jumped out of bed, eager for some breakfast, and was halfway to the kitchen before it hit him. Wait, how did I get here? He couldn't remember much about yesterday, and when he looked down he noticed that someone had taken his shoes and socks off, but hadn't bothered to strip him further before they stuck him into bed. What the hell? Oh, hey kid. You up? He jumped when he heard a voice from the kitchen and rushed over to find Hikari with her head in one of his cupboards. Someone here seriously needs to go shopping, kid. There's nothing but ramen in here. She closed the cupboard and frowned at one of the plastic cups in her hands. Seriously, these have like no vitamins. No wonder you're short. Naruto's eye twitched. Don't you dare knock ramen in my house. It's cheap and it's the greatest food known to man. He tried jumping for his ramen, but with how much taller Hikari was he had to give up pretty quickly. Besides, this way I don't have to spend time on worrying what I'm gonna make for dinner when I go shopping. Go home and eat your own food if you hate it so much. When his words registered in his own brain he crossed his arms and glared at the green-haired kunoichi. Hang on a second, you broke into my house. He pointed at her dramatically. You can't just do that. Took you long enough, kid. Hikari muttered in a distracted tone as she looked around. She hadn't really thought about it before, as she'd been more concerned with how beat up the place was, but Naruto's apartment would actually be rather cramped for 2 people. She had just assumed that he'd be living with someone, since he clearly wasn't living in the orphanage. They seriously left a 6-year-old kid all by himself? Academy student or not, what the fuck, people? Naruto watched on in confusion as Hikari seemed to zone out right in front of him, glaring at the wall while her hands curled into fists. One of the few things he still remembered from yesterday was how she'd put him on his ass with no discernible effort the moment she'd gotten annoyed, so he took a step back before he spoke up. Neishan? Are you okay? Hikari blinked rapidly a few times and smiled sheepishly, a hint of a blush just peeking over the edge of her face mask. Oh, sorry. I was just trying to figure out how some people think. She put his ramen down on the counter and sat down at one of the chairs at the old, creaky dinner table. And I'm not your sis. She tried to find a comfortable spot and gave Naruto a curious look. So, how's your head? My head? Naruto reached up and ran hand through his golden blonde mop. It certainly didn't feel any different, and he didn't have a headache either. What happened? The last thing I remember is that stupid chakra exercise. Hikari chuckled. You didn't think it was so stupid when you heard your class wouldn't be learning it for weeks, Hikari said as she put both her feet up on the table. It creaked ominously, and she quickly lifted them off again with a sheepish look. Anyway, you weren't making much progress, so I had you do a little running too, and then you tripped and smashed your head on a rock. Seems like the medic Nin healed it pretty well, though. Medic Nin? Naruto asked, rubbing his head again. If he'd hit his head that hard, it was strange that there wasn't even a bruise. Shinobi that specialize in healing jutsu. Had them check you over, just in case. She silently chastised herself for not planning further ahead. Medic Nin had seemed like a great excuse for why he wasn't hurt, and had still passed out when she came up with it this morning. Best to just keep talking probably. They can heal a little scratch like yours in seconds, but sometimes it's best to let them heal the worst of the damage and wait for the rest to heal naturally. Or at least that's what she'd been told when they were wrapping her chakra-burned arm in bandages. Cool. So you could just heal stab wounds? You gotta teach me that. Naruto exclaimed, a massive grin spreading over his face as he lost himself in his fantasies. Some jerk would stick a kunai in my gut, and I'd be all oh yeah, watch this and heal myself before stabbing him with his own kunai. Note to self, do all in your power to make sure this kid never meets Anko. Hikari thought as she apprehensively watched the daydreaming blonde. She loved her slightly deranged friend, but she didn't need a younger, and even more hyper copy. Hikari cleared her throat to draw Naruto's attention. It doesn't work that way, yeah? It takes really good chakra control. Hey! Naruto protested. Just because I haven't gotten that stupid leaf exercise down yet, that doesn't mean I never will. I just gotta keep practicing. Hikari chuckled and stood up, checking her watch. Sorry, I didn't mean it like that. You just have an ass load of chakra, kid. The more chakra you have, the harder it becomes to control. She ruffled his hair as she passed him and stepped into the hall. You have the right idea though. Just gotta keep practicing. Anyway, I gotta leave, but first, here. She handed Naruto a small basket filled with a few Tupperware containers. I wasn't sure how you'd feel, so I made you some food just in case. She leaned over and pointed at them, explaining what was inside. Some vegetable soup, don't look at me like that, it's healthy. This is a fruit salad and that's a sumhem I had left over. Oh, Naruto stammered, looking at the basket. He wasn't really getting things. Not from anyone who wasn't the Hokage anyway. Thank you, Nei-chan. You didn't have to. Especially the vegetable soup. He could have done without that, but still, this was probably the first time someone had actually brought him food. He looked up at her with big, blue eyes and gave her a wide smile. Really, thanks? It's not a 5-course meal, kid. Don't sweat it, yeah? Hikari muttered, a little uncomfortable with how grateful he was for a bit of food. She could only wonder about his reaction if she'd brought him any of that ramen crap. And I'm still not your sister, kid. He put the basket down on the table and turned around to thank Hikari again, but then he saw the clock and yelped in surprise. Shit! I have school today. I'm so late. He began running back and forth in the kitchen, pulling at his hair. Oh man, Iruka-sensei's gonna kill me. I won't even be alive to graduate. Oh shit, oh shit. He was brought to an abrupt stop when he tripped over Hikari's extended leg. Oh. The hell was that for? Your sensei's already aware you'll be late, kid. She nudged him with her foot as she looked at the clock. I talked to him this morning. Naruto immediately bounced up again and hugged the far taller girl. Yes. You're the best, Hikari Nichin. He hesitated for a moment, and then gave her his best puppy dog eyes. Say since you talked to Iruka-sensei nobody would mind if I just, don't go. Right. The question was met with a stony glare, and he sighed. Ya didn't think you'd say yes. 2 floors below, the building manager was rudely stirred from his slumber by a loud crash from above, followed by an angry female voice. Eat your breakfast and go to school, you fucking brat. Bonds. The day after his unfortunate first tutoring session with Hikari, Naruto waited until everyone had made their way out of the class before approaching Iruka. Iruka-sensei? Could I ask you something? Iruka looked up from his desk in surprise. Normally Naruto was the first out of the door when the bell rang. Immediately he felt himself growing paranoid, and he started looking in places Naruto had previously placed traps. Okay, Naruto, why are you pranking me this time? The blonde smiled sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. No, that's not it, I promise. Perhaps he had been a bit too aggressive in pranking Iruka if the man thought his only possible reason for staying behind was to prank him more. Just Hikari Nichin told me to ask you something. Hikari? Oh, of course, you had your first tutoring session yesterday. How'd it go? Iruka asked with a smile. And of course you can ask me something if your tutor found it difficult to explain. It went pretty well, but she made me do a lot of boring bookwork. Naruto made a face to show what he thought of that. He also decided to keep the somewhat embarrassing fact that the session had ended with him passing out to himself. Anyway, we talked about being a shinobi and, well, killing and stuff. She said she's done that a lot, so. And you're uncomfortable with the idea of killing? Iruka asked with an understanding smile. He got little more than a shrug in reply, but he'd seen enough students work their way up to this question. That's natural, Naruto. However, I won't sugarcoat it for you. You'll probably have to kill sooner or later after graduating. Either to save yourself or your friends, to complete a mission, or to protect Konoha itself. He leaned back in his seat and toyed with a few of the papers stacked there. It's part of being a shinobi. I had trouble with it too. It's part of the reason I decided to become an instructor. I'm not cut out for field work. But you did start out doing field work, right? Naruto asked, idly scuffing his feet. Did you have to kill? Iruka nodded, a wry smile on his lips. Yup. A few times. He leaned forward and placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Look, it's not like killing rabbits like we had you all do at the start of the year. That's just to help you get used to the idea. The first time it happens, you'll probably be shaken up. However, you won't know if you're cut out for it until it happens. He squeezed the little blonde's shoulder. I always figured I was doing it to protect those dear to me, and that helped. Perhaps you just need to think of it like that. Naruto looked at his teacher and nodded slowly. Right now, he didn't really have that many people he'd consider dear to him. Sure, there was the Hokage and Ayame and her old man from Ichiraku's, but that was about it. The idea of one day having lots of important people to protect, though, was very appealing to the little blonde. I'll try. Thank you, Iruka-sensei. Don't mention it, Naruto, Iruka said with a grin. He stood up and stretched, before looking down at the little blonde again. What were you two talking about anyway that landed you on this topic? Hikari Nichin specializes in capture and assassination missions, Naruto answered. Iruka blinked at him in surprise for a moment, but slowly a look of dawning comprehension appeared on his face. Oh, of course. Your tutor's from the Hoshiko clan, isn't she? The specialization in question wasn't exactly a popular one, so word got around of people who took it. Of course, that wasn't the only word going around about Hikari Hoshiko and her family, but Hiruka had always written those off as nasty rumors. That kind of makes sense, then. He saw Naruto give him a questioning look and adopted his lecturing tone with a chuckle. If you want to be simple, you can identify two categories of shinobi. The first is shinobi who prefer traps and stealth in a fight. The second is shinobi who prefer to overwhelm their enemy and smash right through their guard to kill them. The Hoshiko clan is a rather extreme example of the second sort. He looked down at Naruto and grinned. A bit like you really. More wrecking ball than scalpel. They sort of have to be, as their large chakra reserve often make them easy to find. Naruto stared into the distance as he thought on what he'd been told. But you always say surprise is a shinobi's weapon of choice. Oh, they'll fight much like other shinobi. They wait for the right moment and go for blind spots just like everyone else, but the difference is just in the scale at which they fight. Iruka saw Naruto was still having trouble grasping it and chuckled. You'll understand if you ever see it. He paused uncertainly for a moment. You aren't bothered by the mission she prefers to take, right? Naruto vigorously shook his head. Of course not. Hikari Nichin's not a bad person. Sure, she knocked him on his ass, but she didn't treat him like most of the village did either. Yeah, she kills people, but everyone keeps telling me it's part of being a shinobi. His smile grew into a wide grin. Besides, she has to be pretty strong if she keeps completing those missions. Training with her is gonna help me become Hokage for sure. The Hokage knows how to use a clock, kid. Naruto turned around to find Hikari leaning against the doorframe, face shadowed by her hood. Hello, Yumino-san. Just picking up the kid. Naruto looked up at the clock and blushed. They had agreed to meet outside of the school about 10 minutes ago. Sorry, Nei-chan. I lost track of time. That's probably my fault. I tend to jump all over any chance to lecture. Iruka added as she walked over to the tall kunoichi. We didn't really have time to introduce ourselves when you came by to tell me Naruto would be late. Yumino Iruka. Nice to meet you. Hikari's red eyes darted between the extended hand and Iruka's scarred face a few times before she finally reached out and took the hand. Hoshiko Hikari. Nice to meet you too. She noticed the way Iruka's eyes lingered on the dark skin of her fingers and quickly found something else to turn his attention to. Has the kid been paying attention? Iruka smirked as he stepped back. If Naruto ever actually wants to be in class, I'll retire immediately because I'll never witness a greater miracle. He ignored the blonde's indignant shout. But at least he didn't skip. Hikari chuckled softly and beckoned Naruto over. I'll see if I can beat a work ethic into him. Come on, kid, let's go. She nodded to Iruka and walked out the door, closely followed by Naruto. Before he could close the door, Iruka called after him. Naruto. If ever want to talk again, just let me know, alright? We'll get some ramen or something. Naruto grinned widely at the scar-faced instructor. I'll hold you to that, Iruka-sensei. He closed the door and left Iruka feeling strangely worried for his bank balance. Naruto generally refused to take the back streets. It was just a sign that the villagers' odd hatred of him was having some effect. No, instead he made a point of taking the main roads. However, that didn't mean he had to like being on them at the end of the day. They were always at their most crowded then, and that meant there were more stares and awful comments flung his way. Just smile. They'll see once you graduate. He coached himself as he plastered on a fake grin and studiously ignored the negative attention. You looking at something? Hikari, apparently, wasn't as inclined to ignore it. Her piercing red eyes were locked on an older woman, who had stopped to glare angrily at them. Say what you have to say or move the fuck along, yeah? She said, arms crossed under her chest and foot tapping against the road. The woman only glared harder, but then turned around and kept walking, mumbling to herself about the state of the shinobi forces these days. Hikari scoffed and continued, now moving at a pace that Naruto almost had to jog to keep up with. She led the Naruto to one of the newer training grounds, as she didn't want to explain to the kid why the old one looked like someone had bombed it. Alright, get your stuff out, she said as she plunked herself down on a stump near the edge of the clearing. Naruto groaned loudly and progressed, but opened his bag anyway. Much like the day before, they spent a good portion of their time on the theory. Naruto answered question after question, and every now and then Hikari would add a little to the theory by giving examples from her own experiences. This time she didn't limit them to just one book, and she kept switching between subjects after every chapter or so. Soon enough Naruto felt like his brain was bleeding again, and he felt like hugging the older girl when Hikari took pity on him and announced they were doing something else. You did well, so we're gonna do something extra again. Finally, Naruto all but tossed the book over his shoulder and gave her a massive grin. What are we gonna do, Hikari-nichan? She raised a handful of leaves, eyes twinkling with barely restrained laughter. Did I mention that I'm not your sister? You suck, Hikari-nichan. This also went much the same as it did yesterday. Naruto still struggled to slow the tiny flames even the slightest bit, but whenever he failed he immediately held out a hand for a new leaf. Hikari had to admire his determination. When Naruto was forced to drop the last leaf Hikari had picked, cursing under his breath, the kunoichi reached out and ruffled his hair. Damn it, I can't even do a basic exercise? Naruto crossed his arms and pouted. I told you it wasn't gonna be easy. You're trying to squeeze an entire lake through a tiny straw, kid. All we can do is widen the straw slowly, Hikari said, scratching her cheek beneath her face mask. Don't worry about it, yeah? This took me quite a while to get right too, and I probably had less chakra when I was your age. Though he felt a bit better at knowing that he wasn't the only one to struggle with the exercise, Naruto still felt a little sore that he'd apparently always have difficulties with something so vital for a shinobi. Not that Hikari gave him much time to linger on it. Since Naruto had energy left, and it fit the lie she had told him that morning, Hikari had him run laps around the field. A lot of laps. As in, she didn't let him stop until sweat was running down his face and his clothing stuck to his body. Why am I doing this? Naruto panted as he passed Hikari, who was lounging on a stump with a cookbook. Can't we practice taijutsu? Of course not, Hikari muttered as she turned the page. We're working on your basics. Physical conditioning is one of those, and you need to get stronger. She noticed the blonde was glaring at her and chucked a kunai at him. No slowing down. The blade barely missed Naruto's ankle and dug deep into the earth, dragging a yelp from him. Is that thing real? In response, the green-haired kunoichi chucked another one at him, which cut his sleeve. What the hell, Hikari-nichan? If nothing else, it did make him move faster. Each time Naruto slowed down, Hikari absently chucked another kunai at him. When he finally collapsed, he was covered in more than a few shallow cuts. I hate you. He groaned into the dirt. Hikari laughed and pulled a scroll out of one of the pouches of her vest. Here, kid. She unrolled the scroll, pressed her thumb to the center, and unsealed a water bottle. Something tells me you need to rehydrate. Naruto greedily drank from the bottle while Hikari walked around the field, gathering up the weapons she'd thrown at him. He watched her work for a while, but soon felt himself getting bored and decided to question her further. It was probably best to get as much information from her as he could. Still, as he tried to decide on a topic, he came to the realization that he didn't really care about her missions or what jutsu she could teach him. What's it like to be part of a clan? Hikari froze while inspecting one of her kunai and turned one guarded red eye on him. Why do you want to know? Naruto chuckled and sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. Well, I just wanted to know. I mean, hello, orphan and all. He gestured at himself. It's like a really big family, right? Must be nice. A wistful smile played over his lips as he imagined a clan of his own. I suppose it's sort of like a family, Hikari answered as she sat down, still toying with a kunai. But there's a lot of people with the Hoshiko name who I'm technically related to, but don't know or have never met. Hell, even plenty who aren't even related to me. She gave Naruto a curious look. Aren't there a lot of clan heirs in your class? Ah, yeah? Naruto answered. His smile faltered for a moment. But I don't really have a lot of friends in my class. Besides, I don't want to ask them. He shrugged. I suppose I can see how that would be a little awkward. Hikari muttered, looking at the little blonde. Honestly, she wasn't sure how to answer his question at the moment. She'd have been a lot more favorably disposed towards the whole thing a few years ago than she was now. Still, Naruto had asked, so the least she could do was answer. Actually, family sums it up pretty well, she said as she idly drew meaningless symbols in the sand with her kunai. We're our own people and we love each other, but we all have a duty to ensure the clan does well. Sometimes we fight, but we're all proud to be members of the Hoshiko clan. She smiled and drew a small crown in the sand. We're born from stars, after all. Naruto watched silently, captivated by the way Hikari's eyes softened as she watched her clan's symbol. They clearly meant a lot to her. Is that why you became a kunoichi? To help your clan? Hikari looked up from her drawing and nodded. Partially. My dad's a shinobi and mom was one too. I wanted to be like her when I was little. Was? She died during my 3rd year in the academy. Hikari ran a hand through her green hair and sighed. Her and an entire genin team. No idea what hit them, but they never found bodies and they never arrived where they were supposed to. It still felt strange talking about it. It had gotten easier, sure, but talking about it always seemed to make it that much more final somehow. Oh, I am sorry, Naruto said quickly. I didn't mean to remind you. While he knew what it was like to miss having a parent in your life, he couldn't say that he knew what it was like to lose one either. Still, he figured it wasn't something he would want to be reminded of at least. Hikari let out a humorless chuckle and shook her head. Kid, it's alright. Don't worry about it. She leaned back to look up at the sky and only then did she realize how late it had gotten. Shit, I think I kept you pretty long. Come on, grab your stuff. She made one more pass of the training ground to make sure she hadn't left any weapons behind, and when she turned she found Naruto picking leaves from the trees surrounding them. What are you doing? Getting leaves, Naruto said, jumping for a branch and snatching a few more. I'm gonna keep practicing this stupid exercise. He wasn't going to expect the fact that he had large chakra reserves as a reason for not being able to do this. He'd practice his ass off, and then he'd show off in front of everyone when they had to start the exercise in class. The streets were largely deserted when they made their way back to the residential district, and on a crossing near Naruto's apartment building Hikari stopped. My place is over there, so I'm gonna leave you here. See you the day after tomorrow, alright? Why not tomorrow? Naruto protested, gesturing with his hand full of leaves. We can just meet every day, right? The more he met with Hikari, the sooner they'd catch up on the theory, and the more likely it was that she'd teach him cool jutsu after all. I can just swing by your clan compound. Your clan does have one, right? Hikari nodded. It wasn't very big, and it took a while before it was assigned to them, since the Hoshiko clan itself wasn't very large nor vitally important to Konoha when they first arrived, but the clan had a small compound not far from the Nara clan. You could, but I don't live there, she said with a wry grin. I've got a place of my own near the shopping district. What? Why? Naruto asked, confused. Don't you want to live near your family? If he had a clan, he'd get a home right in the center of the compound so he could see them all pass by every day. Well, remember how I said a clan is like a really big family? Hikari asked as she pulled her hood up. Sometimes families fight. I got tired of their shit, so I decided to get a place somewhere else while they pulled their heads out of their asses. She smiled when she saw Naruto actually giving her a pitying look and ruffled his hair, much to his annoyance. I don't need your pity, kid. I'm fine. This will pass. It hadn't in the past 6 months, but it would eventually probably. Okay then. Naruto murmured uncertainly as he tried to smooth his hair out again. Are you sure we can't just meet up tomorrow? I promise I'll be better at the leaf thing by then. Hikari laughed, but shook her head. Kid, I need to do other things too. My place is kind of expensive, so I'll need to take other missions every now and then. Well, that and she didn't want to spend every evening tutoring Naruto. She wasn't the most social creature, but that didn't mean she didn't like getting plastered with her friends every now and then. Drunk Anko was hilarious, when she wasn't hitting on anything with tits. She looked at the leaves in Naruto's hand and gave the little blonde a stern look. Don't spend all night on those, yeah? It's gonna take time before you get good at it. She nodded at the leaves. Screw that, Naruto answered with a grin. I'm gonna get this by the next time we meet, and then you've gotta teach me something new. The green-haired kunoichi crossed her arms and chuckled softly. Sure, kid. Tell you what, if you manage that, I'll teach you something special. She saw Naruto open his mouth to cheer and quickly held up a hand. However, only when I see you're ready to learn it, yeah? You need to have a good grasp of the basics first. Naruto's excitement was barely diminished, and he almost sprinted home. Sweet. You'd better have something awesome to teach me, Hikari Nichin. Not your bloody sister. She chuckled as she watched him go and turned to make her own way home. He'll be lucky to get it in a week. That estimate turned out to be grossly inaccurate as, 2 days later, she found herself looking on in amazement at the leaf in Naruto's hands. He hadn't stopped the fire from spreading, not entirely, but he had managed to slow it to such a slow crawl that it would probably take most of the day before he'd have to let go. So about what you were going to teach me? His smile was almost insufferably smug, but she couldn't help feeling a little proud. Not that she didn't smack him anyway, though. From then on they established a bit of a routine. Every other day, after school, Hikari would pick Naruto up and they'd claim a training field to work on until dark. They'd always start with theory, and when Hikari decided they'd done enough, she'd throw a few practice exercises at Naruto. Mainly this still involved the leaf exercise and running laps, but she soon noticed Naruto growing used to the laps and made him do other exercises. Jumping jacks, sit-ups, anything she could think of to tire him out. Naruto often complained about how she wasn't teaching him anything cool, as they were mostly working on his strength, speed and of course his chakra control. She had him doing all sorts of variations of the leaf exercise, from balancing it on his head to actually making it burn faster, and even keeping it from burning while running laps. He had to admit that the tutoring was having some effect though, both in class and outside of it. After a few weeks it was time for his first makeup test, and he found that, unlike before, the answers actually came fairly easily to him now. He was still never going to be a straight A student, but at least he was scoring average or higher now. Hikari had picked up a few new things as well, most of them involving Naruto. Clearly the Hokage had been correct when he told her that the physical part of his education would probably come easier to Naruto, as he visibly became stronger and faster. She still managed to tire him out by the end of the day, but it was like he only came back more energetic for their next session. Still, the promise of practical exercises proved to be a good motivator whenever Naruto whined about having to work on the theory. She'd also taken to teaching him how to dodge, mainly whenever he bugged her about how she'd promised to teach him something special. Naruto was even less fond of that part of their sessions than he was of the theory, as the dodging practice involved him bobbing and weaving for his very life as Hikari chucked shuriken at him. He soon learned to just stop asking and to accept that Hikari would teach him when she thought he was ready. His normal classes continued at a steady pace too, and most of the boys were absolutely thrilled when they heard they were ready to start the basics of Academy Taijutsu. They had a long practice every other day, and it became clear pretty quickly that some students were going to do well in this class. Most of the clan heirs were in this group, as they were taught their clan's own style at home after school, and to the surprise of many of the students, so was Naruto. He wasn't quite as good at some of the trickier stances or moves of the style as some of his classmates, but he was often stronger, faster, and far more willing to take a punch. Pain is a good motivator for learning to block, but not to Naruto. He'd take 2 punches to the face, if it meant he could land one that would take his opponent out. Granted, this brawling style of fighting had proved less than effective against Sasuke and his interceptor style or Kiba's equally aggressive Jujin Taijutsu, beast human body techniques, but he managed to last a bit longer each time. Hikari was pleasantly surprised that, after each lost spar, Naruto actually asked her to train him harder. She was very impressed by how determined the little blonde was, despite his background, and she had to admit that it was cute to see him light up whenever she told him he was doing something well. She'd even started letting him get away with calling her Nachan when she was in a good mood. And it was a nice day. And nobody was around to hear. She could do without his curiosity though. He had asked her multiple times about why she chose to cover up as she did, why her skin was darker than nearly everyone in the village, and what was with the massive seal that could be seen above the gap in her flak jacket and shirt when her hood was up. All of those were topics she didn't like talking about, except to the ones closest to her. She could see herself talking about it with the kid at some point, but for now she figured he was too young. He didn't need to worry about her problems. She'd fully meant for things to stay that way, but after about a month or two she found good reason to have a heart-to-heart with Naruto. That day, Naruto was eagerly heading for the training field. In keeping with the idea of teaching him things slightly before his class learned them, so long as he did well in their sessions, Hikari had promised Naruto to teach him about incorporating a kunai in his taijutsu. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been so excited. Probably when Ichiraku's was holding that 2-for-1 sale. He arrived to the training field to find his tutor sitting near a small pond, with her back against a large tree. She was reading a scroll with her clan's symbol on the back, but the moment he stepped into the clearing she looked up and those piercing red eyes found him. "Hey Hikari Nichin," Naruto said as he walked over and she rolled the scroll up. He put his bag down next to her and grinned happily. "I made sure to bring a few kunai, like you asked?" As he generally did, he tipped his bag over and let the contents spill out without bothering to simply take them out when needed. It was impossible to tell which book Hikari would tell him to start with, anyway. The kunoichi sai twitched when she looked at the resulting mess. However, this time her attention wasn't on the abused books. "What's that?" she asked, pointing at a rust-marked piece of black steel that poked out from between the old, weathered books. Naruto gave her a confused look and picked the object out, holding it up for her to see. "A kunai, of course." "Why?" he asked. Hikari took the weapon from him and examined it with a frown. On closer inspection, it seemed the rust had spread to just about every part of the kunai. In fact, it looked like someone had just tried to paint over it. "Are they all like this?" she asked, her tone even. Naruto showed her the rest of the kunai had brought, and it became pretty clear that, yes, they were all sort of like this. She studied each in turn, her mood growing darker with each flaw she found. Rusted to shit. Dull. Chipped. Going to break on the next blow. She counted them off as she inspected them and put them down to the side. "Where did you get these? You can't seriously think these are any good," Hikari muttered. "Hey!" Naruto protested, crossing his arms over his chest. "Those were expensive because of all those stupid taxes." If he'd been paying attention, he'd have seen Hikari's eyebrows shoot up at that, but he kept going. "Besides, the guy told me about the special material he used to make these." Hikari looked at him in silence for a while and let out a dark chuckle. "Taxes and special material, HM? Okay." She began very calmly putting the kunai back into his bag, ignoring his attempts to catch her eye and find out what was going on. "Pack up, yeah? We're gonna make a few things clear." She stood up and Naruto had to quickly throw everything back into his bag and rush after her. "Hikari-nichan, wait!" He struggled to keep up with the far taller girl. He had seen Hikari annoyed plenty of times during their sessions, generally at him, but he'd never actually seen her angry. Her eyes were all but impossible to read and at first glance she seemed calm. However, the tense set of her shoulders and the suddenly very deliberate way she moved made Naruto wonder if this would be his first time seeing her truly mad. She had him lead her to the shop he'd bought the kunai at, and the shopkeeper barely looked up when they entered. Hikari looked around for a moment, and then walked over to the far wall, where dozens of kunai were on display. She spent a few moments quietly studying these, from dirt cheap to ridiculously expensive, and then nodded to herself. "You want to see something funny, kid? Watch this." She picked out one of the most expensive kunai and walked over to the counter. "Excuse me?" she began in a kinder tone than Naruto had ever heard from her. "I'd like to ask about this kunai." The dark-haired, middle-aged man behind the counter reluctantly tore his attention away from his magazine, but quickly grew more invested once he saw the kunai she was holding. "Ah, a very fine choice, ma'am. That's imported, that is. Steel from Tetsu no Kuni, ironically. Great stuff. Very strong." Hikari nodded politely. "I see. That sounds good, but they're a bit pricey to buy in bulk. You don't sell second-hand, do you?" The man theatrically placed a hand over his heart with a self-depreciating smile. "Ma'am, you wound me. I do not have the talent to make my own wares, but I am an excellent merchant." He gestured at his wares. "Made by others they might be, but I ensure my customers get nothing but the best. None of these have been used." Hikari's eyes narrowed and she held out a hand. "Naruto, give me a kunai, please." Naruto handed over one of the damaged kunai, trying to ignore the way the shopkeeper's eyes hardened when he noticed the little blonde. By now, Naruto had his suspicions on what this was all about, but he still wasn't entirely sure what Hikari was trying to do. The green-haired kunoichi put the rusty kunai down on the counter, much to the shopkeeper's confusion, and then brought the imported kunai down on it as hard as she could. With a terrible noise, the rusted weapon snapped in two and the imported one buried itself deep into the counter. "What the hell are you doing?" yelled the store owner. He stared in horror at his ruined counter and glared at the kunoichi. "You better believe you're paying for this, girl." "Really?" To call Hikari's voice ice would have been charitable. "Naruto, that kunai I just broke, you bought that here, yeah?" Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and glared at the store owner. "Yeah, I bought it here." He said the only thing I could afford with all the different taxes was the special stock. He honestly couldn't say he was terribly surprised, but between this man and his instructors at the academy, he was getting kind of sick of people screwing him over. "What? You lying little brat. I only sell the finest wares." Well then, Hikari grabbed the merchant by his collar and all but pulled him over the counter, putting them face to face. "We should have a little talk, yeah?" 10 minutes later they walked out of the store again, Hikari still sincerely pissed off and Naruto with a bag full of the most expensive kunai in the shop. As it turned out, there were a lot of weapon stores in Konoha, and whenever the smaller ones fell on hard times, they took to scrounging training fields for kunai and shuriken that got left behind. Even if they were no longer usable, they could sell them as scrap. Or, when the village's punching bag walked into your shop, you could just pawn them off to a gullible kid for an absurd price. Naruto was barely aware of Hikari's foul mood, though. He was far too busy inspecting his new kunai. "I think these are the most expensive weapons I've ever owned," Hell, I think they're the most expensive things I've ever owned, period. He turned his attention to the tall kunoichi and grinned widely at her. These are so cool, Hikari Nichin. You didn't have to do that though. You could have just told me that guy sold me crap and I'd have found a different store. I'm kinda used to it anyway. Hikari let out a long sigh and crouched down so she was at his eye level. Kid, you shouldn't be used to it. That's not right. She placed a hand on his head and gave him a soft smile. Now how about you tell me about the other stores that treated you badly, yeah? Naruto didn't consider himself a particularly vindictive person. Sure, if people pissed him off they could expect a pranking, but he never did anything too serious. Still, he found that seeing Hikari manhandle people was oddly cathartic. They went by every store that had ever denied him service or jacked up their prices, and Hikari would convince the owners that this was not a very good plan for future business. Apparently the threat of bodily harm and creative use of profanity made for quite the argument. He learned at least 6 new insults that day, though he'd have to look up hemorrhoids in the dictionary later. By now they were both carrying bags full of stuff from the different stores they'd been to. It was still paid for, of course, but at a seriously reduced price. Hikari had called it compensation for poor service in the years prior. They had everything from food to more kunai and shuriken, but she had pulled him out of the clothing store the moment he'd wandered over to an awesome orange jumpsuit. Apparently he wasn't allowed to go clothes shopping without the assistance of someone who wasn't freaking colorblind. Naruto could only lament the fact that yet another person didn't understand how awesome orange was. By the time they reached the last store they were drawing strange looks from the few people who were still out around at this time, but Hikari pointedly ignored them as she marched right on in with Naruto hot on her heels. Almost the moment he'd stepped over the threshold, the store owner began yelling as he stepped out from behind his counter. Hey! No! What did I tell you? He pointed at the door with a large cleaver as he approached Naruto. Out! I'm not selling my meat to you. Get out, before I hurt. His red face suddenly went very pale when he was disarmed, slammed against the wall, and pinned there by Hikari's forearm on his throat. You know, you'd think I would have gotten used to that reaction, but nope. Hikari remarked as she tossed the cleaver to the side, where it clattered onto the floor. Seeing grown men victimize a kid still pisses me the fuck off. She pushed a little harder against his throat, and the store owner let out a spluttering noise as he clawed at her arm. Look, I've given this speech a lot today, so I'm gonna keep this brief. If I find out you've treated the kid like this again, I'm gonna pay you another visit, and this one will be far less cordial. Is that clear? The store owner nodded furiously, and rubbed his sore throat gently when Hikari let him down. She smiled and turned around. Great, we'll just be going then. She turned around and was already almost out the door when she heard him growl something behind her. Fucking Kumo cunt. She stopped dead in her tracks and turned around very slowly to find a vindictive glare trained on her. Naruto reacted a lot more quickly and snarled at the man. Hey! Don't you dare call Hikari Nichin that, you bastard! I'll call her whatever I like in my own damn store, brat. Thought I didn't know who you are, girl? The store owner said, pointing at her arm. When he'd clawed at it before, he pulled her sleeve down a bit, revealing more of her dark skin. It figures, I suppose? The daughter of a deserter like your father would take up with a creature like him. For a moment Hikari's eyes narrowed in rage, but then she just suddenly seemed to relax. The tension slipped from her muscles and she walked over to the merchant with calm and almost graceful movements. It's funny you should mention my father. She slowly reached up for the hilt of her machete, and the merchant took a few hesitant steps backwards as she approached. Suddenly a large hand grabbed her shoulder and held her back. I thought you were working on your temper, Kari-chan. She turned around and found 2 members of the Uchiha clan standing behind her. Both were Chunin and wore the red band that identified them as part of the Uchiha police force that handled minor offenses in the village. They also both had their clan's signature dark eyes and hair, though the one holding her back had it styled into very short spikes, while the one behind him had thick curls. Daichi. Hikari sighed. To Naruto's surprise, she almost sounded relieved. Isaru. She lowered her hand and brushed Daichi's from her shoulder. I'm not gonna bother dignifying that remark. My temper's fine. She gave him a look that clearly said she'd kick his ass if he argued with that. Daichi chuckled under his breath. Well, maybe it is. He was in his late teens, a little on the short side, and had a slender build. A long scar ran from his left eye to his right, and his easy smile seemed to come naturally to him. He glanced at the store owner behind Hikari and his large, expressive eyes narrowed slightly. He's not dead yet, that's something. I dunno, I think it's still a work in progress. His partner, Isaru, joined in. He was taller and burlier than Daichi, and his left eye was partially obscured by his messy curls. I keep telling you to keep her away from Anko. Maybe she'll stop roughing up merchants. You guys are both assholes, yeah? Excuse me, I'm very sorry to interrupt your little get-together here, the store owner said irritably. He'd gotten some of his confidence back now that there were 2 police officers there. But can I assume you're here to get this bitch and the brat out of my store? Daichi's smile never wavered. Sort of, yes. He turned to Hikari with poorly concealed amusement. Hokage-sama says he appreciates your intentions and the dedication you've shown to them, but feels it would be in Konoha's best interests if you were to stop manhandling its merchants. He glanced at his partner and jerked his head at the merchant. Isaru. The bullier of the two Uchiha nodded. On it. He took the store owner to the man's office. Come on, sir. I'm going to explain what just happened and then we're going to have a talk about what it means to own a store in Konoha. Once they were inside, Daichi chuckled and crouched down to put himself at Naruto's level. Hey there. I take it you're Naruto. He held out a hand and offered the confused blonde a wide grin. Uchiha Daichi. Nice to meet you. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto mumbled as he hesitantly shook his hand. You're not going to arrest Hikari Nichin or anything, right? She was just trying to help. Daichi chuckled and shook his head. Oh, don't worry about that. I have no plans to leave you without a tutor. She's actually told me a lot about you, Daichi said with an amused laugh. She says you pick up the practical exercises pretty quickly. Naruto beamed at Hikari. She also said she basically needs to hit you with the books before you get the theory, though. Naruto slumped and pouted at his tutor, who shrugged and gave him a sheepish smile. She knew it wasn't entirely his fault, but that didn't keep her from getting frustrated at times. Daichi chuckled and patted Naruto on the head when he noticed his downtrodden expression. Don't worry, kid. We all have things we're bad at. Like Kari-chan and peaceful conflict resolution. He stood up and turned to the tall Kunoichi. Speaking of which, it probably is best if the two of you get out of here for now. Well, since you won't let me stab him. Hikari chuckled dryly. Let's go, kid. Naruto nodded and quickly stepped outside with his bags. He was already walking away from the store when he noticed Hikari wasn't following him. What the hell? He turned around and quickly headed back to the store. They were probably done for the day, but Hikari still had some of his stuff. Hikari Nichin, are you woe? He found Hikari and Daichi locked in her tender kiss. She was leaning down a bit to make up for the height difference, and he had one finger hooked under her face mask, pulling it down just enough to reveal her lips. At Naruto's exclamation they quickly shot apart, Daichi laughing while Hikari growled. Kami kid? Just wait outside. Red-faced, she pulled the mask back up while Naruto nodded quickly and disappeared back outside with wide eyes. Still laughing softly, Daichi ran a hand over her covered cheek. Hey, come on. The kid didn't know. I'll see you tomorrow, yeah? Hikari leaned into the touch a little and smiled. Sure, stick me with the nosy brat. Naruto was waiting for her almost directly outside of the store with a mischievous grin, and Hikari quickly decided the best way to fend off the oncoming questions would be to simply pretend nothing had happened. She gestured for Naruto to follow and set off for the residential district. So. Well, the idea had been good in theory. Figured you could get a moment with your boyfriend, HM? Naruto said. A display like that in front of an innocent child like me. I feel like I might have been corrupted just now. He shook his head dramatically and placed a hand over his heart. What would Hokage Gigi say? Hikari snorted and rolled her eyes. Innocent my ass. Besides, it was just a fucking kiss. She held up one of the shopping bags and gave Naruto a meaningful look. Actually, he would probably mention the fact that I'm the one carrying your damn ramen. Naruto paled. I'll be good. That bought Hikari a few minutes without questions, but Naruto could only keep quiet for so long. How did Daichi and you meet? The academy? He paused and looked around. Oh crap, I actually need to go left here. You're coming with me, Hikari said, steering him right instead. We pissed a few people off today, so it's probably better if you're not alone at your crappy apartment. I've got a couch you can crash on and we can put your stuff away until tomorrow. Naruto blinked in amazement at his tutor for a moment. He was well aware that not everyone in Konoha hated him. He got the occasional kind word and a few of the tenants in his building would sometimes bring him food. Still, nobody had ever looked out for him like this. Nobody had ever offered to put him up for a night. Thank you, Hikari Nichin. Don't mention it. She ruffled his hair as they walked and gave him a kind smile. As for your question, Daichi's 3 years older than me, so we never really saw each other at the academy. She brushed something from her shoulder. My dad was under investigation for a really long time and Daichi's dad was in charge of that. We saw each other as kids every now and then because of that. Investigation? Naruto asked. He thought back to the last store owner for a moment, who had said something about Hikari's dad being a deserter, but if that was the case, why was he still here? Wouldn't that make him a missing nin? What did he do? Hikari was silent for a while and when she spoke again, she was careful to keep the emotion from her voice. My dad's from Kumogakure. Village hidden by clouds, she said. They had a plan for a mission that would hurt Konoha, but many civilians could be hurt, and it might have started another war. Dad lost both his folks in the last one, so he decided to prevent the plan from working. He came to Konoha and told the Hokage of the plan. She sighed and ran a hand through her hair, fingers lingering in the red streaks among the green. Kumo aborted the moment they realized what had happened, and Dad eventually joined the shinobi force here and married Mom. They kept him under observation for a really long time to make sure he wasn't a sleeper agent or spy or something. A hint of bitterness crept into her tone. They never found anything, but it never stopped people from calling him one. Realization slowly dawned on Naruto's face. Oh, I guess that explains your skin color. He saw her shoot him a look, and he quickly raised his hands in a placating gesture. I didn't mean anything bad. I think it's pretty. It makes you unique. Hikari chuckled and held her hand down next to his cheek, the dark skin of her fingers that wasn't covered by her fingerless gloves a stark contrast to his paler skin. Yeah, it's not exactly common here. She looked at her hand for a minute and then looked down and gave him a grateful smile. Thank you, Naruto. Only people like Daichi or my family have said that before. Don't worry about it. Naruto grinned at her. He wanted to ask Hikari more about the circumstances of her father's defection, but despite her concealed face he could tell she wasn't very comfortable talking about it. He decided to find a different topic. Have you and Daichi been together long? No, not very. Coming up on a year, but he's been nothing but sweet and attentive. There was this one time I came back from a mission and I was really ill. Naruto smiled as he watched the way Hikari seemed to relax while talking about her boyfriend. She always seemed like a fairly tense person to him, so it was nice to see a different side of her. While he was a little young to really appreciate a relationship, having someone to talk about like Hikari spoke of Daichi didn't seem like such a bad thing. So no wedding yet? Hikari let out a bark of laughter, her face coloring slightly. Fuck no! We're way too young for that, yeah? She walked up to a far larger and nicer apartment complex than Naruto's and unlocked the front door. I'm not sure the relationship will last that long, but we've got plenty of time to work it out. She threw the door open and gestured for Naruto to enter. Come on. I'll cook and we can make plans for what we'll do if the guys we dealt with today give you trouble again. Naruto gave her a curious look as he stepped into a nice lobby with tan walls and a dark stone floor. Hikari Nichin, I don't think Chiji's gonna let you get away with attacking them again. I thought you were good at this. She chuckled as she walked to the stairs. I'm not allowed to manhandle them. I figured you would know a few perfectly nonviolent pranks. I think I love you, Hikari Nichin. A few months later, as they were coming up on a full year of tutoring, Konoha was turned on its head by the Uchiha massacre. When, years later, Naruto talked about it with Sasuke, they both had to admit that their lives could have turned out very different if not for a single choice. Naruto was halfway to school the morning after the Uchiha massacre before he finally found someone who would tell him what was going on. It wasn't hard to notice something had happened, of course. A lot of people were rushing around all over the place, the rooftops were littered with shinobi, and everyone seemed either panicked or on the verge of tears. Sadness covered the village like a thick blanket. When he finally got the whole story from a half-drunk street vendor, he immediately turned around and sprinted all the way to Hikari's apartment. He could barely believe it. The entire Uchiha clan, save Sasuke, gone. Just gone. All of them dead. Murdered by one of their own. He could barely wrap his head around it. He arrived at Hikari's place, and immediately began pounding on the door as hard as he could. Daichi had stayed over a few times before. Maybe he just slept in, and people had forgotten about him. He can't be dead too. He has to be with Hikari Nichin. Naruto thought frantically, pounding so hard now it was making his hands hurt. Over the past few months his relationship with Hikari had lost the strictly student-tutor feeling, and they started spending more and more time with each other outside of their sessions. Naruto was overjoyed to finally have someone other than the Hokage in his life who treated him normally, even if she worked him to the bone during their training, and he had grown to look up to her for her devotion to both her career and his tutoring. She still regularly took missions, but tried very hard to make sure they didn't interfere with any planned tutoring sessions. When they did, she was always there the next day, tired and often covered in blood but ready to help. After their tutoring sessions, Hikari often took him back to her place and cooked for him. Sadly, she refused to make ramen more than once a week and she insisted on including vegetables with everything, but Naruto couldn't really complain too much. The girl was a goddess in the kitchen. Increased interaction with Hikari meant Naruto also saw more of Daichi, whom he had come to like a lot. The slender Uchiha was very kind and endlessly patient, a trait that came in handy when dealing with his temperamental girlfriend. He was also nothing but kind to Naruto and always had stories ready of what Hikari had been like when she was just out of the academy, which always earned him a pointed glare from her. Young as he was, even Naruto could tell the two were very good together. Daichi's warmth and love of life had a calming effect on Hikari who, in turn, made him get up and keep trying whenever something wasn't going well. Suddenly the door swung open and Naruto almost hit the person on the other side. He looked up, hopeful for a second, but then he saw who it was and it all came crashing down. "Ha, I told her you were gonna stop by, Gaki," Enko muttered through bleeding, swollen lips. The purple-haired kunoichi was dressed in her usual combination of fishnet under a tan trench coat, and she looked more than a little disheveled. Her hair was down, the remains of a hair clip hanging from a few strands, and a number of nasty bruises were quickly forming on the left side of her face. Naruto barely registered all of that, though. All he noticed were her eyes. Sad, tired, worried. Nothing like the playful, mischievous glow they normally held that had prompted him to label her crazy snake lady the first time they'd met. Well, that and the poisonous snake she'd thrown at him as a greeting. Hikari had instantly regretted that she'd ever introduced them, claiming that they were far too much alike and that her quota for loudmouth idiots was used up. Needless to say, they had both been more than a little insulted at that. Daichi had simply watched from the kitchen, trying very hard not to laugh as they loudly proclaimed that they weren't loud or idiots. "Come on," Enko muttered, beckoning him inside while she straightened her torn coat. Hikari's apartment was nice, though often messy, but that was nothing compared to the state it was in now. Most of the furniture had been knocked over or smashed, the wall was cracked and broken, and glass from the TV littered the floor along with a number of bottles. Hikari was leaning against the wall near the smashed TV, nursing a black eye and what seemed like a bleeding nose, because her face mask was stained red. She noticed Enko first and slipped into a defensive pose, but faltered when she saw Naruto. "Kid, what the fuck? Why aren't you at school?" Her surprise quickly turned to anger, which she turned to Enko. "Why the fuck did you let him in?" The older kunoichi rolled her eyes and slid into a defensive stance of her own. "Because I'm done being your punching bag, Kari-chan." Her eyes shot from Hikari to Naruto and back, but her expression was unreadable. And Nagaki knew him too. So Naruto began. It came out like a high-pitched croak and he cleared his throat before trying again. "So he's gone. Daichi." Nobody answered him and Naruto felt ice settle in his chest. "Say something." "Yeah, Gaki," Enko said at long last. "Daichi is dead." The words had barely left her lips before Hikari howled in anger and rushed at Enko. She cleared the room in a burst of speed nearly too fast for Naruto to follow and lashed out, but the more experienced kunoichi saw the blow coming and bent over backwards to avoid it. Enko pulled hard on the overextended arm, making Hikari stumble, and kicked her hard in the back while she tried to regain her balance. Naruto had to quickly jump out of the way to avoid being bowled over by the dark-skinned girl and decided to put some distance between himself and the fighting kunoichi. He hadn't seen Hikari this affected by anything before, but he knew her well enough that she wasn't great with sadness. She didn't know what to do with it, and that frustrated her and turned it all into anger. And she was very, very angry right now. Hikari turned around and launched herself blindly at Enko again, but the purplet met her halfway and slammed her into the wall, pinning her there. "Are you done?" Enko growled, struggling to keep Hikari in place. The taller girl only cursed and bit her on the arm, hard, until Enko let go of one of her wrists with a pained grunt. Hikari immediately punched her in the stomach twice, but Enko had clearly been serious when she said she was done being a punching bag, because she reared back and slammed their heads together hard. Dazed and in pain, Hikari barely resisted when Enko grabbed her wrists again. When she noticed she was pinned, Hikari weakly began to struggle, but Enko slammed her against the wall again. "Enough already. I figured this would be cathartic for the first 15 minutes, but it's been 30 now." Hikari refused to face her, so Enko grabbed her by the chin and pulled her head around. "Do you really want to go to his funeral looking like you just got out of a war zone?" "Like I have a right to go," Hikari fired back, eyes bright with anger and pain. 2 weeks, Enko. 2 weeks I've been walking around with my head up my fucking ass, being awful and blaming him for something that wasn't even his fault," she yelled, struggling harder than ever against her friend's hold. "What the hell are you talking about?" Enko growled, arms straining. She shot Naruto a questioning look, but he could only shake his head. He was as confused as she was. Sure, he'd noticed Daichi had been by less in the past 2 weeks, but he just figured the Uchiha was busy with work or something. "Got a lovely little visit from one of my clan elders 2 weeks ago," the green-haired kunoichi hissed, bitterness dripping from every word. "Oh, the clan was so very pleased to see that I was pursuing a normal relationship now. He couldn't make it clear enough how happy they were that we could put all this foolishness behind us now." "Foolishness, Enko." Naruto was still utterly confused as to what was going on, but realization was slowly dawning on Enko's face, and her eyes softened as she looked at her younger friend. Fuck, Kari-chan. How messed up is that?" Hikari asked, not even bothering to struggle anymore. "I fall in love with Mina and suddenly I'm not good enough anymore, but a few years later I date a guy and suddenly everything can just go back to normal." Her eyes narrowed. "Fuck that. Fuck all of that. I all but threw him back to our compound and then I took it out on Daichi." She swallowed dryly and shook her head. I was so angry, and he just wanted to know what he'd done wrong. Never even got mad. What was I supposed to say? It wasn't his fault. The fight drained out of her quickly, and suddenly Hikari felt so very, very tired. She slumped against Enko, tears gathering in her eyes. I was such a bitch. The last thing I said to him, fuck, I can't even take it back now. I was such a b-bitch and I can't. Enko wrapped her arms around her in a tight embrace, and Hikari couldn't stop herself from sobbing anymore as she buried her face in Enko's neck. Her legs buckled and the snake mistress slowly lowered her to her knees, muttering softly in her ear. Fuck Hikari, hey, easy. She nervously ran a hand up and down the younger girl's back, uncertain what to do. She didn't comfort people, she tortured them. It'll be alright. That only made Hikari cry harder, and Enko turned to Naruto, eyes wide. You can help any day now, Gaki. Naruto quickly stepped forward and embraced Hikari from behind. A few tears of his own slid down his cheeks as he pressed his face against her trembling back. Hikari had always seemed so strong. Unbreakable, almost. She worked so hard for what she wanted, yet she never let anyone notice she was tired. He'd only ever seen her try her hardest. Seeing her like this, hearing her cry and feeling her body tremble caused his heart to clench painfully. She seemed broken, and he wished he knew how to take away her pain and put her back together. Hikari's sobs and shaking slowly trailed off until she was just silently crying into Enko's shoulder, unwilling to lift her head and face her friends. Kami, I'm such a useless bitch. Stop saying that. Naruto snapped out. I didn't know Daichi long, but I know he wouldn't care about the past 2 weeks. He'd just want you to feel better. He squeezed her tighter. You're not a bitch, Nei-chan. I dunno, she can be a right bitch when she wants to be. Enko said in a light tone, ignoring Naruto's pointed look as Hikari seemed to shrink in on herself. But Daichi knew that, and he didn't give a fuck. She let out a bark of laughter and shook her head. He was so sickeningly in love with you. Hikari was silent for a long time, before shaking her head. That doesn't mean I shouldn't have apologized. I can't now. I can't tell him how fucking sorry I am that I didn't spend every waking moment of the last 2 weeks with him. Not in person, Enko said. But there's still the funeral. I can't go to that. Hikari shook her head again, sounding a little panicked. I don't want to be there all by myself while they bury him. What the fuck, Nei-chan? Both Kunoichi jumped at Naruto's exclamation, and Hikari finally lifted her head when Naruto let go of her and stepped around the two so they were face to face. You seriously think we're gonna let you go to that alone? Even if we didn't want to say goodbye too, we wouldn't make you deal with that by yourself. He gestured at a smirking Enko. Even the crazy snake lady is trying to comfort you, I think. She might just be sneaking a snake in your clothes. Enko was still smirking, but it had a harder edge now and her eye twitched violently. Agaki, that was really sweet. She purred. Also, your I feel like I should hug you or stab you. I'm gonna stab you. Hikari gently pulled away from Enko and looked from her to Naruto and back. You guys. Enko's eyes softened, and, in a rare display of tenderness, she mussed up Hikari's dark green hair. I will forever deny having said this, but the kid's right. We'll be with you, okay, Kari-chan? Red eyes filled with tears again, but this time a small, uncertain smile tugged at her lips. Thanks, yeah? She whispered before she pulled Enko into a hug again. Thank you? Naruto grinned at the awkward way Enko hugged her back, until she reached out and pulled him in as well. Nei-chan. He wheezed, struggling in the Kunoichi's tight hold. When Hikari finally let them go a few minutes later, they all sat leaning against the wall, not sure what to do or say now. Naruto eventually decided to focus on the mess that was Hikari's living room. You guys seriously couldn't find a better way to deal than wrecking the place and each other? Enko chuckled sheepishly and toed one of the empty bottles that littered the floor. Well, we tried getting drunk, but that didn't work out. At 8 in the morning? Great idea. Naruto muttered sarcastically. He looked around the room and his eyebrows shot up as he took note of the number of bottles. There were at least 9. You drank all of these? How are you not unconscious? Sure, he'd never had alcohol, but old man Ichiraku had a tiny bottle of sake every now and then if it was a slow night. By the end of the bottle, he was generally red in the face and grinning at nothing in particular. If he gets like that from just one. Enko scoffed. Because Kari-chan doesn't have any decent liquor. She gestured at one of the bottles with disdain. She always gets all this fruity crap with more sugar than alcohol. Don't knock my booze, Enko. Hikari grumbled. I prefer to drink stuff that doesn't taste like paint thinner. Sue me. She reached for one of the bottles. Oh hey, this one's got some left. She twisted the cap off and threw her head back to take a large gulp of the bright green liquid inside. She sighed and passed it to Enko, who did the same, hesitated for a second and then held the bottle out to Naruto. Hikari shot her a look, but the snake mistress just rolled her eyes. What? The Gakis had a shitty day so far too. It's not like there's enough here to get him drunk. The taller Kunoichi still didn't look entirely pleased, but she apparently wasn't going to argue, so Naruto quickly took the bottle before she could change her mind. The drink smelled strongly of apples, with an unmistakable hint of alcohol. He wasn't prepared for the taste, though. The stuff was a strange combination of sweet and incredibly sour that lingered in his mouth long after he'd swallowed. And used to the burn of alcohol in his throat, Naruto coughed as he passed the bottle on to Hikari. That's a kinda sour. No shit, kid. Hikari chuckled humorlessly as she tipped the bottle back again. They spent a good part of the day like that, just sat against the wall passing the bottle around. At some point Enko laughed, and wondered about Daichi's reaction if he saw them sitting in the mess they'd made. That led to them swapping their favorite Daichi moments. Of course Naruto had far fewer than the two Kunoichi, but he found himself enjoying the tales anyway. Like his first date with Hikari, during which he'd been so nervous he'd rambled on about clan politics for half an hour without taking a breath. Or the time he'd accidentally insulted Hikari's mustard sauce, and she distracted him with a kiss, before pouring the contents of the saucepan onto his crotch. When the bottle ran dry, they set to fixing up the apartment as best they could. There was little they could do about the TV or the cracks in the wall, but Naruto surprised Enko and Hikari with how good he was at fixing the broken furniture. With minimal tools he managed to fix most things in such a way that the damage was barely visible, and the fixed furniture was still pretty sturdy too. Of course he'd gotten more than enough practice while fixing his own things. Every now and then someone broke into his apartment, and smashed a few things and Naruto would have to fix them, or he'd have no chairs or a table to eat his breakfast at. Necessity had caused him to improve quickly and he'd actually started to find some enjoyment in it. These days he even made a point of looking for old tables, chairs and other old furniture that people had tossed out. They were often too big and heavy to drag back to his place, so instead he took whatever part her needed to replace what was broken. His table even had 4 matching legs now. As they worked, Naruto thought back to something Hikari had said earlier and he turned to her while he swept up some glass. "Nei-chan, what were you saying about that guy from your clan earlier?" Immediately the set of her shoulders became tense, and she exchanged a quick glance with Enko as they tried to fix the coffee table. "Right, you were here for that," Hikari muttered. She was silent for a bit, ignoring Enko's attempts to catch her eye as she hammered away at a nail. "I told you I was in a fight with my clan, yeah? It was about that." Naruto's face scrunched up in confusion. "What's that have to do with Daichi, though? You said he was talking about you guys, as boyfriend and girlfriend, right?" "Yeah," Hikari muttered reluctantly. She continued to work in silence for a bit, hoping he'd drop the topic, but when she still felt inquisitive eyes trained on her a few minutes later she sighed and put the hammer down. "Fuck, I so did not sign up for this talk, but I suppose I might as well rip the band-aid off quickly." She put the coffee table back where it belonged with Enko's help and then sat down on it carefully, and turned her attention to Naruto. "Okay, you know that, most of the time, boys fall in love with girls and vice versa, yeah?" she asked, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Yawa," Naruto said, drawing the word out hesitantly. "And? Well, sometimes people like other people from the same gender. For example, a girl might find out she likes other girls." "Who doesn't like girls?" Naruto asked, incredulous. "I mean they're pretty." Enko doubled over with laughter, and some of the uncomfortable tension seemed to flow out of Hikari, as she chuckled and shook her head. "Okay, I'll give you that, but it's not quite what I meant. I meant a girl who likes girls instead of boys. You know, a girl who only falls in love with other girls or a boy who only falls in love with other boys." "Oh, gay people!" Naruto exclaimed, finally understanding where his tutor was going with this. Enko had barely recovered from her previous bout of laughter, but at the little blonde's exclamation she doubled over again. Hikari, meanwhile, cringed and glanced at her wall. She really hoped the neighbors couldn't hear that. This was embarrassing enough already. Yeah, gay people. So you know what that is. That's good. I don't have to go into that any further then." She coughed to clear her throat, barely resisting the urge to tack the words "thank Kamion" to that sentence. "But did you know that there's people who like both genders? They can fall in love with both girls and boys." "Huh?" Naruto scratched his head and squinted at her. "I don't get it. I mean, aren't you supposed to like one or the other?" Enko grinned widely and slung her arm around Naruto. "Oh, you poor, naive gaki." She pulled him close, pressing the side of his head into her sizable chest. "Trust me, sexuality is not as flat and clear-cut as that. There's a whole array of bends, curves and hills you will learn to appreciate as you grow older. We'll find you a nice girl to make it clear for you when you turn 16, or maybe a boy if you're into that. Or both, if you're like our dear." "Yes, thank you, Enko." Hikari cut in sharply before turning back to Naruto. "What she's saying is that there's no real rules. You can be attracted to one gender or both. We call people attracted to both bisexual and yeah, Some prefer a certain gender, but others don't really care either way, and then there's people who aren't really attracted to anyone at all. And Enko watched her friend ramble on nervously for a few minutes, drifting further and further away from the original point to this conversation, before she finally held up a hand and cut her off. Okay, this was funny, but now it's getting kinda sad. I feel like I'm about to put a small animal out of its misery. She looked down at Naruto. What she's trying and failing to tell you is that Kari-chan likes to fuck both girls and guys, Gaki. Enko! Hikari and Naruto shouted simultaneously, both growing bright red with embarrassment. The purple-haired snake mistress winced and rubbed her ears. Okay, you two have been spending too much time together. She pointed at Hikari. The brat's making you loud. She pointed at Naruto next. And she's clearly started to make you as prudish as she is, so I need to prevent that. Hikari buried her face in her hands with a dramatic groan. Thank you, Enko. She glanced at Naruto through her parted fingers. But you get where I was going with this, yeah? Still red in the face, Naruto nodded. Yeah, you're something sexual, right? Bisexual, kid. Right, that. He waved the term off. You like both guys and girls. He paused for a moment, and then shrugged and rubbed the back of his head. Well, okay. Like I said, who doesn't like girls? Not really sure what you see in guys, though. Enko grinned and pulled the little blonde into her chest again. Me either, kid. She's just weird like that. The green-haired Kunoichi had to take a moment to remind herself that they had only just started cleaning up her destroyed living room and that using furniture to beat Enko over the head for her particular brand of help would only slow things down. You don't have a problem with that, then? No. Why would I? Naruto answered. Well, that makes you better than most of my clan. A grim smile pulled at Hikari's lips beneath her face mask. See, kid, I was dating someone else for quite a while before Daichi asked me out. My teammate, Minako Kurizuchi. She sighed and ran a hand through her hair. We had kinda grown up together in the academy, and at some point friendship wasn't enough anymore. We both kinda ran around with our heads up our asses for a while before we realized that we needed each other. Hikari leaned back on the coffee table, which creaked ominously, but held together. We graduated and we were so happy we wound up on the same team. When we heard, we told her parents that we were dating, as far as that goes at that age, and they took it pretty well. Her hands curled into fists. My clan was less accepting. She ground out through clenched teeth. For a few minutes Hikari just sat there, staring at her fists, before she began to speak again. Before we came to Konoha, my clan nearly tore itself apart through infighting when a clan head tried to appease members who didn't take to him well by telling them that they would succeed him, before finally handing the position off to his son. After that, the elders decided that any new clan head would have to ensure a clear line of succession before the successor's 6th birthday. She looked up, eyes hard. My uncle is the current head of my clan and his wife is infertile. This meant he had to pick a successor from the next generation of his relatives, meaning me or my cousins. Pride flickered in her eyes for a moment, and she leaned forward a bit. I am the best of my generation at what we do. Always have been. He talked it over with my parents and me, and eventually I was appointed as successor, and they began grooming me. Etiquette lessons, more training, learning clan politics, all of it. She gestured wildly as she talked. And oh, the elders were so very pleased with my progress. They were all so very certain that I would make a good clan head when I grew up. She grit her teeth. Of course, that was before I told them I was in love with Mina, because I looked up to them and figured they'd want to know I discovered something so important about myself. She stood up, started pacing up and down the length of her living room. All it was to them was a problem. They only cared that there'd be no clear successor, again, and blah 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 instability of the clan, blah 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 good genes being lost, blah 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 passing down our Kekkei Genkai. She threw up her hands. Fucking bigoted, old idiots. Only one bothered to ask if I was even sure I didn't like boys, and when I told them I still kinda did, they just immediately decided that my feelings for Minako were meaningless. Oh, you're far too young to know about something like this. Hikari continued, warping her voice into a mocking imitation of an old man that drew a snort of laughter from Enko. You're just hormonal and confused. You'll find a nice boy soon. It's just a phase. She snorted, barely containing a bitter laugh. Some phase. Years later and I still like a nice pair of tits just as much as, and I just remembered you're still a kid and I should probably put this differently. She trailed off awkwardly when she noticed Naruto looking at her with wide eyes. Meanwhile, Enko had crossed her arms under her chest and lifted them up as if presenting them with an innocent expression. Well, as close to innocent as Enko could get. Hikari sighed and flipped her friend off, though her eyes did linger for a moment on the wonderful prize on display, and she ran a hand over her face. Anyway, I was so mad. They sat there, talking to me like I was 5 and telling me to throw away a part of myself. Like that would somehow make me stronger, or a better leader. Like I couldn't be a good clan head if I didn't. Her embarrassment at nearly slipping into a rant about her undiminished love of both the male and female form had drained her of some of her anger, and her shoulders slumped. It wasn't even about Minako, you know? I mean, we didn't last. We might have without all of this putting a strain on us, but fuck, I don't know. She let out an annoyed huff. This is what I am. I throw my all into everything I do, so I can't just discard a piece of myself. How can I ever accomplish anything if I'm not whole? She shook her head. Suddenly nothing I did was good enough, yeah? I was still way better than any of my cousins, but they didn't care. Pretty soon they started talking about finding a candidate who could ensure a clear line of succession through blood, and I just quit. I'd had enough. She looked up and shrugged. Their loss, as far as I was concerned. Hokage-sama convinced me to at least not give up all connections to my clan, but I moved out of the compound and I haven't spoken to the elders or my uncle since. She glanced at a bookcase in the corner, where a few picture albums had fallen over during her tussle with Anko. Uncle's pretty mad at the elders and Dad was downright pissed, but Uncle needs the elders to keep the clan together, and Dad's not part of the clan by blood, so his opinion means fuck all to them. See, these are the moments I'm glad to be an orphan. Anko muttered. Or not part of a clan anyway. At least I've never had to deal with crap like this. Naruto still hadn't said a word. He was just trying to digest everything he'd just been told. It was a lot, after all. To be put on a pedestal by people you looked up to, only for them to kick you off said pedestal the moment they saw something they disliked. How did you deal with something like that? Well, anger, apparently. In Hikari's case and way. It certainly explained a few things about her personality, but... And from a clan too. That had always seemed like such an amazing thing to him. Having such a large family and never having to be completely alone. It must have been so hard for her. Stepping away from all of that. He thought, looking at his tutor. When he thought about who was still important in Hikari's life now, the only people he could think of were Daichi and Anko. To go from so many people to so few and then to lose Daichi, that had to hurt. How did you decide whether being alone or ignoring a part of yourself was better? What about being clan head? Naruto asked eventually, looking up at his tutor. That was your dream, right? You just gave up on that? Hikari chuckled wryly and shrugged. It kinda was. Still is. It's just that I don't need that to become great. She turned to look out the window at Konoha and a determined look settled on her face. I am going to be the greatest kunoichi in the world, no matter what. If I can't lead my clan conventionally, I'll lead by example by writing my name in the goddamn stars. She looked down in surprise when something latched onto her and found Naruto hugging her legs. Kid, I didn't tell you this because I wanted your pity. I don't pity you. Naruto protested. He blushed and looked down at the floor. Just I get it, and I'm gonna write my name there too, right next to yours, once I become the greatest Hokage ever. The little blonde grinned happily at her. One day you'll be proud to tell people you used to tutor me. That's a promise. Hikari's breath caught in her throat, and she searched for words that just wouldn't come as she looked down at Naruto. Eventually she settled for ruffling his golden blonde hair silently, and the two stayed like that until Anko finally spoke up again. Okay, this has all been disgustingly sappy, she said with a wide smirk. So I'm just gonna go back to cleaning up. She picked up a broom and faked a hurt look. I'm very distraught that nobody voiced their belief in my future, by the way. Anko, we all know you'll go on to scare the shit out of the world at large. You say the sweetest things, Kari-chan. They all got back to work, but cleaning up quickly wasn't enough of a distraction for Hikari anymore, and she found more fruity booze in the back of one of her kitchen cupboards. While Naruto wasn't really a fan of the flavor, as everything Hikari owned was either too sweet or just left a funny aftertaste in his mouth, he very much liked the warm feeling the alcohol left. It didn't burn quite as badly after his first drink, and the lingering warmth was nothing if not pleasant. By the end of the day both Anko and Hikari were slightly flushed from the alcohol, and yet Naruto didn't even feel slightly buzzed. Anko seemed to find this personally offensive, and vowed to get him plastered, before promptly raiding Hikari's cupboards for sake until the younger kunoichi drew the line and stated they weren't giving a minor freaking sake. It wasn't much of a mystery to Hikari why Naruto appeared incapable of getting drunk anyway. She'd seen the way the kid healed during their tutoring sessions, and that definitely wasn't human. She hadn't inflicted any serious injuries, of course, but nobody was littered with bruises and cuts one evening and then turned up totally fine the next day. She'd bet her sword on his demonic tenant having something to do with that. All the same, she made it very clear when she walked him home that evening that today had been an exception and that she would inflict serious bodily harm onto him if he drank again before he graduated from the academy. Sure, that still wasn't the legal drinking age for civilians, but nobody really cared about that when it came to shinobi. Old enough to kill, old enough to drink was the unofficial motto for most bartenders in Konoha. A few days later they buried Daichi. Naruto had never actually been to a funeral before, and his first experience wasn't exactly standard. Few people attended the funeral, as a good part of Daichi's social network had been members of his clan. People laughed, people cried, and a few of them spoke of what they would remember about Daichi. Hikari was among the few to speak. While she had changed out of her usual outfit, her formal clothes were no more revealing. She still wore a face mask, the one that fit better with the color of her black blouse. Without her hood casting shadows over her face, it was easier to spot the sliver of dusky skin between her nose and forehead, but she had compromised by wearing a plain black headband without the silver flames and pulling it as low as she could. Perhaps it was because she looked so close to her usual self, even in her dark blouse and long skirt, that she seemed to portray that silent strength that Naruto had come to associate with her once again. She didn't cry as she spoke of her relationship with Daichi. Hell, she almost made it through without her voice wavering until she mentioned how he would always try to make her laugh. What had meant to be a wry chuckle came out sounding oddly hollow, and she cleared her throat a few times before moving on. Hikari wound up speaking longer than most others, and when she neared the end, she looked down at her notes and put them down with a sigh. You know, I think this is good. I think a lot of us need it. Getting together like this. However, you know what? She shrugged helplessly. Daichi would have hated this. He would have seen us all sitting here, grieving and remembering what was best in him, and he tried to drag us outside to go do something fun. She looked up from her notes, grief and fond remembrance dancing in her red eyes. He didn't linger on things. It's what made him a good shinobi. It's what made him a good man. She shook her head. This time when she chuckled, it actually sounded like a chuckle. I suppose if he did linger on the bad things people said or did, our relationship never would have worked. A few people laughed, and for just a moment the mood didn't seem so dark. It goes without saying that I will miss Daichi forever, but I left a lot of things unsaid and now I wish I didn't. Hikari slowly folded up her notes and put them away. So I won't this time. She looked up at the ceiling. Goodbye, Daichi. I love you and I'll miss you. Without another word, she stepped down from the podium and sat down next to Naruto and Anko again. She didn't speak for the rest of the ceremony. The next day there was a far larger and more public ceremony during which the entire village gathered to mourn the loss of the Uchiha clan as a whole, save Sasuke, of course. Naruto hadn't really been prepared for how strange it would be to see his classmate again. His empty desk was a constant reminder of Sasuke's absence, though they barely talked about it in class. They had no idea how to broach a topic that heavy and nobody wanted to be the first to try. Naruto wasn't sure what he'd been expecting to see when Sasuke returned, but it wasn't this. The boy seemed pale, his posture stiff and rigid, and he barely seemed aware of what was going on around him. He accepted people's condolences with brief, jerky nods and the occasional one-word answer, but for most of the ceremony he just stared straight ahead. It was a far cry from the happy, popular kid Naruto had seen in class up until that point. Over the next 2 weeks, he was too busy to think much on this, though. Hikari was doing her best to move on and apparently figured the best way to do so would be to bury herself in work like she'd done before she started tutoring Naruto, but the Hokage still wouldn't let her take on that same workload. So she'd increase the number and duration of their tutoring sessions. While these new sessions often left Naruto so exhausted that he had to rest for an hour before he could walk again, he couldn't deny that he was improving a lot. The leaf-burning exercise was becoming easier, and he was certain he could run farther and faster than before. She'd even gotten him started on the academy style of taijutsu, and some very light sparring. Naruto had been extremely excited about that, right up until the moment he learned that the green-haired kunoichi's definition of light sparring involved kicking him the length of the training ground. He was starting to suspect he wasn't the only one to have some issues with control, sometimes. He also came to learn more about Hikari in the first week after Daichi's death than he had in the first month of their tutoring. Whenever she called an end to the session and Naruto collapsed in a heap, she would pass the time by training herself a bit. As hard as she pushed Naruto, she pushed herself so much harder. Of course that was to be expected, since she was a Chunin while he was still a student, but it was still a sight to see her train. If nothing else, it made him appreciate just how fast his tutor could be. He could barely follow her movements most of the time. She still cooked for him most nights, but she seemed a bit more relaxed now. More willing to let the little blonde in, even when it came to topics she wasn't always comfortable with. On the Monday of the third week, Naruto once again found Hikari waiting for him at their training ground. Her hood was down, and she was sat against a tree stump, basking in the rosy light of the setting sun. The moment she noticed him, she threw something at him and Naruto barely caught it before it smacked him in the face. "The hell, Nei-chan? What's this?" he asked, holding up the scroll. It had no special markings and seemed relatively new, but it was smaller than the sealing scrolls he'd seen Hikari use. "Well," the young kunoichi began as she stood up and stretched. "You did earn that, and I said I'd teach you when you were ready." She brushed some dirt from her pants, and her eyes shone with amusement as she watched Naruto look at the scroll like it contained the daimyo's treasury. "You're ready, kid?" Naruto's grin almost split his face in half and he unrolled the scroll as quickly as he could. It was a fairly standard instruction scroll, detailing the hand seals in theory and providing a few rough images to go along with them. "You're going to teach me to spit fire?" he asked. Naruto all but bounced over to Hikari and threw his arms around the much taller girl. "You rule, Ne-chan." Hikari chuckled and ruffled Naruto's hair. "Don't get too excited yet. Gokakyu no Jutsu, Great Fireball Technique, is not a bad starting point for a chakra freak like you, but we might have to try another jutsu if you don't click with this one." "What? Why?" Naruto asked, eyes wide. He didn't want to try another jutsu. This one would let him breathe freaking fire like some sort of dragon trapped in the body of a really awesome shinobi. Why would he ever give up on that? Hikari sat down by her stump again and gestured for Naruto to do the same with the serious expression the blonde had come to identify as her tutoring face. "You remember when we talked about the classes of elemental jutsu, yeah? What were they?" Naruto dug through his memory for a moment. Well, there's Katon, Futon, Doton, Suiton, and Raiton, fire, wind, earth, water, and lightning release, respectively. The answer came out as more of a question, but he was at least 80% sure he'd answered correctly. Hikari nodded. "There's a few others, but generally those aren't really available to most people. You got the main 5. Did you ever think why most people only bother to learn 1 or 2 elements? Because most people are lazy?" The dusky-skinned girl blinked a few times and then let out a bark of laughter. "Ha, you're not entirely wrong. No, it has to do with their affinities." The blank look Naruto was giving her made it pretty clear that he was lost, so she began to elaborate. "Everybody has a stronger connection to 1 or 2 elements, and shinobi tend to use those for their jutsu. You can master the others, but that's generally a lot harder. If this turns out to be extremely difficult for you, it probably means you've not got much affinity with fire, and it might be best to find a different jutsu to start you on." Naruto nodded in understanding and glanced from the scroll to Hikari. "So what are your affinities?" "Fire and wind, but that's true for most people from my clan." Naruto nodded again and tightened his hold on the scroll slightly. So fire is her main affinity. He kind of wanted that to be true for him too. It would be something they would have in common. A connection, even after the tutoring arrangement ended. He grinned at her and pointed at the first step on the scroll. "Don't worry, Hikari Nichin. I'm gonna nail this jutsu, believe it." Never say that again. The next few sessions were mostly concerned with helping Naruto get the jutsu down, which was much harder than he'd anticipated. Elemental manipulation proved to require some serious chakra control, and it took him a lot of tries before he could even muster a spark, much less the huge fireball the jutsu called for. When he finally managed to produce at least a tiny flame, Naruto couldn't stop smiling, and even Hikari seemed much more pleased than she normally was at the end of a tutoring session. She promised Naruto a celebratory meal that evening, and, while they were on their way back from the market, that they encountered something interesting. They had decided to cut through the training areas when Hikari suddenly stopped and looked at something off to the right. "Well, that's interesting." Naruto followed her gaze and found Sasuke on one of the training fields with a pond, standing at the edge of the water. The boy's shoulders were heaving as he took deep, gasping breaths, and suddenly he sped through a chain of hand seals and lurched forward, breathing out a thin, unstable stream of flames that lasted for a few seconds before they flickered out over the lake. Sasuke bent over, breathing even harder now, with one hand resting on his knee and the other running through his hair in a way that screamed frustration. "Looks like you're not the only one trying to get that jutsu down," Hikari remarked. "Makes sense." She noticed Naruto looking at her and gestured at Sasuke. "The Uchiha clan designed the jutsu. It's not strictly speaking a clan jutsu, but Daichi mentioned most parents treat it a bit like a rite of passage." She raised an eyebrow when Sasuke made a second attempt that was marginally more successful than the first. "Generally when they're older, though." Sasuke's third attempt was successful, and he breathed out a sizable fireball that caused the pond to ripple and steam. When he finally couldn't maintain the jutsu anymore, he bent over again, hands shaking. "Impressive," Hikari muttered, watching as the last Uchiha straightened up and slowly walked back in the direction of his clan compound. "Come on, it's getting late." She turned around, but it only took her a few steps to realize that Naruto wasn't following. "Kid? Huh. Oh yeah, I'm coming," Naruto muttered, shooting another look at his classmate's back before he ran after his tutor. It got on his nerves that Sasuke was having so much more success with the jutsu he was still struggling with, but the anger he'd expected to feel had seemingly vanished the moment he saw the Uchiha's face. Despite his success at something pretty challenging, Sasuke didn't seem happy. He hadn't smiled. That evening, after dinner, Hikari was putting away the dishes when she noticed Naruto had forgotten his ratty book bag at her apartment. "Damn it, kid," she grumbled as she looked up at the clock. It was pretty late already and she had a mission in the morning, but Naruto made it a habit to bring every textbook he owned to their tutoring sessions. He probably thinks he won't have to work in class if he can pretend he forgot his books. We'll just see about that. With a sigh, she pulled her face mask up and her hood down, grabbed the bag and slammed the door behind her as she set off for Naruto's apartment, moving through the trees and along the rooftops to make better time. Frankly, Hikari wasn't certain if she wanted to drop them off at the door or just chuck them through the window and hit Naruto in the face with the bag. Option B is certainly more satisfying. She was only halfway there when she passed their training field. She would have kept right on moving if she hadn't heard a familiar voice cry out from that direction. "Oh. Fuck, I think I burned my tongue. Damn it, kid," she muttered again as she landed awkwardly on the tree branch she jumped for. She turned and headed for the training field, where she could now see a small light coming from. New plan. I'm going to slap the shit out of him with this bag. Why is he even out here this late? She found Naruto at the edge of their training field, a small flashlight in the dirt at his feet, while he stretched out his tongue as if to actually check if for burns. Apparently satisfied that it wasn't charred and blackened, the little blonde soon continued what he'd been doing. Alright, so don't breathe in while doing this. Wish Hikari Nichin had mentioned that. He quickly went through the hand seals Hikari had taught him and took a deep breath. Gokakyu no Jutsu. Naruto spat out a stream of flames that lit up the field, but the stream only reached maybe half a foot before the technique lost focus and the flames split off from the main stream and fizzled out. Damn it! Naruto swore loudly. Stupid jutsu. Alright again. If Sasuke can do this, so can I. Hikari let out a long, suffering sigh and face-palmed. Of course the kid didn't grasp that what she'd given him to do was pretty advanced for his age. Especially considering he'd had no clan or family to help him train before now. While Sasuke's achievement was undeniably impressive, the Uchiha had at least had that at one point. This was supposed to be a long-term goal, and here he was like he had to perform the jutsu for a test in the morning. How long has he been here anyway? She wondered, taking in the scorch marks on the field and Naruto's face and hands. She silently watched from her perch in the tree as Naruto tried several more times, only getting more determined with each failure, until he finally breathed out the long, concentrated stream of flames he'd been looking for. It even swelled slightly near the end, almost becoming the fireball the technique was named for when Naruto couldn't hold it anymore. Hell yes! Naruto cheered, doing a slow and exhausted victory dance. I am Naruto Uzumaki, Lord of Fire. Fear me, world. He flopped down on his back with his hands behind his head, still grinning manically. Right, I'm just gonna rest a bit, and then practice some more. Like 10 minutes tops. Of course he was utterly passed out, and snoring after about a minute. Hikari jumped down from the tree, grumbling under her breath about little blonde idiots. She carefully picked Naruto up and set off for his apartment. While she felt he was an idiot for training this hard in the middle of the night when he had school the next morning, she had to admire the determination. She wasn't exactly a stranger to pushing yourself, so she decided not to be too hard on the kid. Naruto stirred in his sleep and pressed closer to Hikari, drawing a soft smile from the green-haired kunoichi. Well, at least you made progress. She dropped him off at his shithole apartment and turned to head home when a thought struck her. She hesitated for a moment, and then turned around and made a few quick hand seals. With a small burst of chakra, she left a small security seal on the door frame. She felt a little awkward doing it, but just because she was only a tutor that didn't mean that she couldn't make sure the kid was safe outside of their sessions. Right. She had barely left before the dog-masked captain of ANBU appeared in the hallway. He studied the seal for a moment, tracing the edge of the small array with a finger. He glanced down the hallway, chuckled softly and vanished again. Technically speaking, he should have removed the seal, but he had a good feeling about this. With Hikari gone on a mission, Naruto was left to train himself for most of the week. He honestly kind of missed having her to help out, because the scroll gave a pretty technical explanation of how to mold your chakra, and Naruto honestly learned best by feeling. Hikari had gotten pretty good at translating technical instruction into something that was easy for Naruto to get. On the other hand, at least there was nobody forcing him to do the boring homework Iruka-sensei assigned them. It was nice being able to put it off without getting nagged or smacked or having shuriken chucked at his head. Hokage should just send Hikari Nichin to tutor bandits. They'd give up in terror in the first 5 minutes. It wasn't long before he once again found Sasuke at the training field with the pond, but he didn't appear to be training. He was just sitting at the water's edge, staring into space with a frown. Wanting to continue practicing his jutsu, Naruto hesitated, but he honestly couldn't ignore the lonely picture the last Uchiha made. He was all too used to being alone, after all. He slowly walked over and sat down next to Sasuke, trying to find something to say. When nothing mind-blowing came to mind, he simply went with what came naturally. Hey Sasuke. Sasuke gave him an unreadable look, but did nothing else to acknowledge Naruto's presence before turning back to the lake. A frown creased Naruto's forehead. Sure, they'd never been friends. Sasuke had enough friends to keep up with, and there had never been much cause for them to really interact. That being said, Sasuke had never been outright rude to him like this either. After sitting in silence for a while, Naruto decided to try again. I'm sorry. About your clan, that is. It must be really awful. With each word, Sasuke seemed to stiffen more, and Naruto eyed the boy worriedly as he tried to figure out what he'd said wrong. He opened his mouth to apologize, but Sasuke was already getting up. Thank you for your condolences, he said without sincerity, before he turned on his heel and walked away. Oh, Sasuke! Hey! Naruto called after him, but the raven-haired boy didn't even look back. What the hell did I do? The little blonde huffed as he stood up. Honestly, he'd only been trying to see how Sasuke was doing, and he'd been a complete jerk. Angrily, he stomped off to train some more, vowing to have a talk with Sasuke the next time he saw him. As it turned out, that was the very next day, in the very same spot. Sasuke was sitting at the edge of the pond again, though this time the light sheen of sweat on his brow seemed to indicate that he had been training this time. He looked up when he heard Naruto approach, and his eyes narrowed for a moment before he turned back to the lake. If you're here to tell me you're sorry again, don't bother. I wasn't going to, but I'll be sure to keep it in mind. Naruto deadpanned as he sat down next to his classmate. You could have been less of an ass about it when I did, though. I was only trying to be nice. HN. Naruto glared at Sasuke's non-committal response. Fine, you don't want to talk about that. What do you want to talk about? He didn't get a response, but that was pretty much what he'd expected would happen, so Naruto took it upon himself to keep the conversation going again. Okay, I'll start. Remember what happened with me at the academy? Well, they got me this tutor and she's really cool, but also kinda nuts. I mean, she throws actual weapons at me and… Naruto spent the better part of the next hour and a half talking about anything and everything that came to mind, while Sasuke only communicated in grunts and annoyed eye rolls. Eventually the blonde decided to get some training in before it got too dark and said a quick goodbye to the brooding Uchiha. After a few steps, Naruto hesitated and looked back over his shoulder. Hey Sasuke? You coming back to class soon? If you don't, I'm totally going to be better than you by the time you do. Sasuke gave him a look that clearly stated yeah, right, and shrugged before turning back to the pond. I don't know, though. See you later then, team. Naruto's eye twitched dangerously as he stomped away. He wasn't sure, but you probably weren't supposed to punch grieving people. Not that Sasuke didn't make it very tempting. Who does he think he's calling dope? I'll show him. I'm gonna make the biggest fireball Konoha has ever seen, and I'm gonna roast his moping ass with it. Naruto found Sasuke at the training fields twice more that week, sitting at the edge of the water either to recover after training or just staring into space with a frown. Each time he made an effort to talk with the other boy, but both polite conversation and trying to get a rise out of the stoic Uchiha were met with grunts or monosyllabic answers. It was frustrating, to put it mildly. I don't get it, Iruka-sensei. Naruto complained loudly, waving his chopsticks around wildly. When Iruka had heard that Hikari was out of Konoha for the week, he'd offered to buy the hyper-blonde a bowl of ramen at Ichiraku's. This very quickly turned into one bowl for Iruka and about 4 so far for Naruto. I get that Sasuke's really sad, but I don't think he's said more than 2 words to me every time I tried to talk to him. And then there's that stupid nickname. Iruka lazily leaned to the side to avoid some of the noodles Naruto was accidentally flinging around and sighed. Naruto, you can't force these things. Sasuke's having a lot of trouble dealing with this. It's only natural. Naruto noisily slurped up a noodle and glared at his instructor. Well, duh, that's why I decided to talk to him in the first place. When Iruka gave him a confused look, Naruto sighed and looked down at his bowl. He must miss his clan, and I don't think he's talking to his friends. I figured he would be lonely. He trailed off, bashfully pushing some vegetables around in the broth. I mean, I understand what he's going through, but… Naruto, Iruka said hesitantly. The thing is, you don't. When he noticed the blonde glare at him, he quickly held up a hand. I don't mean anything bad by it. I just mean ugh. Frustrated, he ran a hand over his face. You've never lost anyone, have you, Naruto? The blonde opened his mouth to respond, but then seemed to realize something, and he slumped slightly as he shook his head. You needed people who were close to you if you wanted to lose them in the first place, and he'd never been particularly blessed where that was concerned. Loss hurts, Naruto. So very much. Iruka muttered, absently tracing his scar. It can break people. The loneliness that comes from that. He looked at Naruto, and for just a moment he saw his mother, bleeding and dying. I'm not sure if it's worse or better than regular loneliness, but they're not exactly the same. Naruto was looking at Iruka with the sort of focus the instructor wished he would apply during class, but finally he looked down and dejectedly pushed some of the vegetables around in his ramen. I don't really get it, Iruka-sensei. The scar-faced instructor chuckled and reached out to ruffle his hair. Well, I guess you are a bit young for a topic like this. Naruto smacked his hand away with an annoyed glare and tried to smooth down his hair as he continued. Maybe I really don't know how Sasuke feels, but I do know one thing. He looked Iruka dead in the eye, face set in a determined expression. Being lonely sucks, no matter the reason. So I'm gonna find some way to help Sasuke, even if he is being a jerk about it. Iruka eyed his student quietly for a while and then lifted his bowl and finished off the broth. He put it down again with a satisfied sigh and smiled softly down at the table. You know, you're a pretty good kid, Naruto. Naruto squinted at him. You don't have to sound so surprised, Iruka-sensei. Next time. Would you just shut up? What do you know, huh? You're just some dough. Just the dead last, just as you always will be. Why the hell would I ever need help from someone like you, dough? Hikari found her hand twitching towards her machete, but held herself back with some effort. She wanted to kick the little duck-haired brat's ass for saying that to her friend? Student? Surrogate baby brother? She honestly wasn't sure, but hell if she was going to let Sasuke talk to him like that. Suddenly Naruto let out a dry, humorless laugh. Dead last, huh? His jaw was clenched, hands balled into fists, and his expression was set in the type of stony calm of someone holding back rage. I see. He stood up, glanced at Sasuke and glared. Let's test that. Jutsu. Katan, Gokaki no Jutsu, Fire Release, Great Fireball Technique, Nature, Fire Class, Offensive Range, Short to Medium Rank, C. An offensive jutsu that has the user convert chakra to flames inside their body and then expel them from the mouth either as a continuous flamethrower or large ball of flames. The scope of the attack is dependent on chakra used to fuel it. It was a commonly used technique among the Uchiha clan and treated as a rite of passage. However, due to the jutsu's relatively high chakra requirement, it is generally only taught to graduates of the academy. What if Hiruzen makes Naruto Hokage Chunin exams? Hinata Enko, and thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoyed this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.